The sorry, the next section is section 7. As I already indicated, 7.1 and 7.2 will be taken together. Councillor Mowat is here as a ward member on 7.2, but I think we'll just ask you to do your presentation to committee just now, Councillor, if that's okay. And then we'll also have Peter, I think, is he online? Yes. Okay. So that'll be done at the same time as well.
You're very welcome, Councillor Mount.
Thank you. I'd say it's nice to be here, but I'm trying to take tech out of my diary. It seems to be a recurring monthly appointment. Okay, do you want me to just go ahead, convener? Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you, convener. I wasn't going to come along this month, but I have come along this month because I read the beginning of 7.2 and I got to paragraph 3. And it said, we've made good progress delivering the city mobility strategy. And I thought, I know what will happen. You'll all come in here, you read the papers. There's lots of papers to read. It's a hugely dense agenda that you have to go through. And you sit in the tech bubble, and I've done it for many years. And I just wanted to, the point of the slideshow that should run in the background, and I'm not going to speak to each slide, is just to remind people of the conditions of the road. Now, I've chosen this route, which is West Maitland Street, Shamwick Place, and Princes Street, because it should be the most accessible street in the city. Every vehicle that travels along this route has to be an accessible vehicle. It's a bus, it's a taxi, a black cab, or it's a tram, or it can be used by cycles, and for cyclists as well. You know, potholes, uneven pavements, problems with ironwork are deeply concerning. Because they will come off. So when you come off your accessible vehicle, if you've been on your accessible vehicle, my favourite slide, this one actually, when you come off your accessible vehicle, this should be a safe environment for someone who's using a wheelchair, who's got, unsteady on their feet, who's got mobility issues or pushing a buggy. It should be a really good environment. Now, if we are doing well, delivering on our promises, this, as the premier and most accessible street in the city, shouldn't look like this. And it's these trip hazards. We'll get to one where we've concreted over a drain and we create a flood next to it. This is not good progress. So I just want people to think, you've got a report in front of you that asks you to spend between 843 million and 1.4 billion pounds on changes, and this is the current infrastructure in the city. This is practically impossible to cross in a wheelchair, and I watched someone try to do that yesterday, and they were just sitting, looking at the crossing, going, how the hell do I get across this road? Is it right to propose more changes, more money, when our lampposts, our traffic lights don't even face in the right direction? That traffic light faces towards the Scott Monument. Now, the last time I checked, there was no traffic coming from the Scott Monument along the road. It doesn't need to be controlled. So that's your physical infrastructure, point 1. Point 2 that I want to address is the operational changes that were supposed to be put in when we trialled the proposals. So we've started trialling what's now becoming SAF, Strategic Allocation Framework. And when we did the proposals for the first tranche of changes in what was then the city centre transformation, we said, yes, we'll work this out, despite problems being brought forward saying, how does the access, specifically to Coburn Street, work? We said that would be sorted. Well, it hasn't been sorted. This week, I had an email from a man who lives on Coburn Street. He's one of the last residents. There were 2 flats in his stair of 15 that were occupied by long-term residents. He wanted to have the Edinburgh Furniture Initiative come along to remove a large piece of furniture. This is great. He's recycling that bit of furniture. He's not moving it with private car. He's getting someone in to do a delivery. No, they can't take access. Despite being told, you press the buzzer, the bollards will go down, and you'll take access. No one to take access. The other long-term resident in that block of flats sadly died earlier last year. The private ambulance coming to collect the body couldn't collect access. So it is my contention that until you are convinced that the proposals in these report will deal with these issues so that this is a living city centre where you can live with massively reduced car use, where you can live when we restrict the access into these places, and it's going to be smooth and as easy as buying a bungalow with a parking place outside in suburbia, that we should take a pause and ensure that that can be delivered, because otherwise we are not creating a walkable and accessible city. We know that the highest scoring project and desire for people was to have a walkable and an accessible city centre in the consultation. This is what we have at the moment on what should be the most accessible street in the city. And until we can get that good enough, I don't think we should be proposing fantasy sums of money that we don't have to try and do that. And I would ask people to bear that in mind when you're taking your decisions today. And of course, vote for the Conservative amendment, which does indeed do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. I mean, you'll be aware that this year we had quite a significant increase in the funding for road and footpath maintenance, which we can't address all those issues in 1 year, but the team has worked hard, and I think will resurface about 600,000 square metres of roads and footpaths in this current year. And let's hope that funding is sustained for the next few years. And I understand Mr Barwell was speaking to Councillor Watt about this during the break, about how we do that. But we also have to plan for the longer vision for the city, about how we accommodate growth, how we deal with congestion, how we reduce emissions, and how we ensure the economy thrives. But at this point about accessibility of the city centre, particularly people who have mobility problems, etc., is really, really important. But I just wanted to ask, do you think fewer vehicles in the city centre will help people move around more easily and more safely? Fewer of those non-essential vehicle trips into the city centre?
I think the thing that's the major impediment to people moving around safely and freely is the condition of the pavements and the roads. And that impacts cyclists on the roads, and it impacts pedestrians and people with mobility issues on the roads. And that's what my mailbox tells me, it's what my residents tell me, and it's what the people tell me. At the moment, the changes that have been made so far from the point of view of the city centre, and this is not the same with the rest of the city because you'll be struggling with different things in your wards, but in the city centre, the amount of traffic going through it is significantly reduced in large areas, and that it is highlighting the problems with the access of day-to-day maintenance.
But those issues aside, in terms of the condition of the roads and footpaths, reducing those non-essential through trips into the city centre is going to improve the pedestrian environment for walkers and wheelers.
That's your assertion, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Mount. Do you have any questions for Councillor Mount? Oh, Councillor Munro.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along, Councillor Mowat. You spoke about the fact that traffic has significantly reduced in your ward, and the pavements and roads have not improved as the slides have shown us. I notice in my ward, in Ward 10, that the traffic has significantly increased as drivers and motorists and those who are having to get across the city, maybe to see loved ones at hospital or at St Columba's Hospice going back and forward across the city, they need to use their car, and the roads and the pavements are appalling. Now, they're getting worse in my ward because of what's happening in the city centre. Do you think moving forward with the current plan that's being proposed, that the situation with regards to our roads and pavements in the wards out with the city centre is only going to get worse?
What has happened recently, and what's detailed in the report and the papers you have in front of you, shows that those roads out with this pedestrian nirvana that is proposed to be created, that will apparently be increased, will be significantly worse. And I can detail areas in my ward where traffic has reduced, but main residential streets, which people live on, which were quiet streets, are now much busier streets. And I know that that is not unique to those areas of the city centre where that's happened, but you can see it all across the north of the city, where traffic has been pushed further and further north to avoid, because it's avoiding routes through the city centre, and I'm aware that it's also happening in the south and on roads that will skirt the city centre. And your report says that there will be significant issues, that there will be significant increases in traffic and problems on, I think, Lothian Road and roads to the east of the city centre.
Councillor Dublin.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Councillor Mowat for her slideshow, which highlighted obviously issues in the city centre in road conditions and footpath conditions. And it kind of reminded me that while we're talking about city centre, state of the roads and pavements, and that are a challenge to people who have mobility issues. Would you agree that we shouldn't forget about the outlying areas which aren't affected? And I'm thinking particularly of areas like Royston Mains, where the state of the road is appalling, the pavements, the footpaths are appalling, and in those areas of high deprivation, you do also get, I think, a significant number or significant proportion of the population who are dependent upon wheelchairs and mobility aids, and who inevitably find it incredibly difficult to move around.
Yeah, I only brought this particular route because of all the routes in the city, given that everything that accesses this route, the vehicles accessing this route, should make this a really brilliant street for people using wheelchairs. And I meant to say that I appreciate that for members who actually probably see less spending than is attracted to the city centre, you will be familiar with this type of issue. Yeah, my proposal is, what frustrates me about seeing the proposals and the routing is that they're talking about diverting our current funds and current capital spends to deliver something that is going to create additional problems for people, and we can't get the basics. This is Princess Street, West Maitland Street and Shamwick Place, and it is as bad, if not worse. In fact, I know it's significantly worse in other areas and shopping centres across the city, which people want to access and get out and about. And really, until we can say that that level, we've delivered that to our satisfaction and in line with what the proposals in the papers and what a consultation has told us that is important about accessible places and people and walking and walking. I mean, it's walking. It's walking and wheeling. That should we be putting in such a major project, which is going to suck away that resource from the day-to-day maintenance?
Councillor Dublin's going to be quite excited about what his budget's going to be like in terms of road and footpath maintenance. Having said that, it's going to be interesting. Councillor Rosler.
Thank you, Councillor Arthur, and I look forward to seeing what budgets are going to come forward. Councillor Matt, you raised some really good points, so does Councillor Dobbin, about the general state. I just wondered, though, whether you think that possibly maybe Tech has the balance slightly wrong, that the two elements aren't mutually exclusive. We can have a higher policy and a higher kind of aspiration. We can also deliver. So are you sort of saying the fact that we can only do one?
I think my position, and it's not a new position, I don't think it's news to anyone when I say, I think you have to demonstrate that you can do delivery before you start putting in the higher aspiration. And when you've demonstrated over a sustained period of time that your delivery matches the ability for you to take on higher aspirations and deliver that well, then you'll be in a good position to take people with you. My worry is that we won't take people with us, because that is the daily reality for people who don't realise there's this WYSI plan. And is the WYSI plan going to fix that? That has to be, for me, that's the priority. Make sure whatever you do fixes this.
So it looks like the final question falls to me, Councillor Myatt. So, I mean, the city is congested. We've got an obligation to reduce our climate emissions, a moral obligation. And also, you know, we've got fantastic growth predicted within the city and much more in the surrounding local authorities. So transport has to adapt. And that can't mean more or even the current level of cars coming into the city centre or even through Councillor Munro's ward, because that's just not sustainable. What is your solution to the congestion, city growth, reducing climate emissions? If it's not the plan being put forward today, is your alternative just that we should fill potholes?
Well, I mean, the duty on the council is to maintain the roads network. I'd ask that whether we were maintaining it adequately. There's been a lot about it. There's a Scotsman piece today that we have the second worst council in the UK for potholes. The worst is Glasgow. Oh, great, Glasgow's doing slightly better. But that's, and we're also, we're actually the worst for getting them fixed. So, you know, I appreciate that there is a balance here. What we have in front of us, and what you have in front of you today, is saying we want to be world leaders, European and world leaders in place-based changes to transport. I would like to be a European leader in the maintenance of our streets before we become a European leader in place-based transport. And frankly, I don't need to be a European leader. I think we're to be perfectly honest, I think we're too ambitious, because the financing, we don't have the budget for the ambition that is sitting across the that is proposed today. And that's the bottom dollar. And you have to cut your cloth to what you have. So if you need to reduce transport, I mean, there are legislative positions that we haven't pursued, that we haven't made progress on. It's now in the report about using ANPR to change things, but we haven't made progress on delivering the use of ANPR for moving traffic offences in Scotland. There are... And until you can do that, you can't do your operational centre, which you talk about, but you don't tell us exactly how that's going to be delivered, what it's going to cost, where it's going to be, and how that's going to deal with some of the issues. At the moment, I have residents who, through road closures we have put in, used to do a 0.6-mile journey from the Western Approach Road when they came into town, and their journey is now 1.4 miles. So they have doubled their journey. So that's not doing anything for your 30% reduction because of our road closures. They are a resident and they're not driving around the city to go to the shops. They're driving to do work out with the city. They need to leave the city and they need to use their car because they're going somewhere that they can't get to public transport on. So if you double your journeys but reduce them by half, you've got the same mileage. So that is the balance that I'm wanting you to look at and strike. And I want to stop here now because you've got so much business to do. I'm happy to take any questions, and I can probably sit here all day and talk about it, but I really don't think you want me to listen to do that. I hope that was the last question.
Councillor Mowat the Merciful, sparing us. So thank you, Councillor Mowat, for coming along. I mean, you do make good points about road condition, and I think all of us here take that seriously. So I hope we do anyway. So thank you, thank you.
You can only spend the budget once.
Unless it's tourist tax, we seem to spend that over and over and over again. But yeah.
So the report 7.1 and 7.2 will be heard together, as I said. So that's City Mobility Plan, first review, and our Future Street Circulation Plan for Edinburgh. There are Daisy Narayanan and Ruth White and Phil Noble are here to speak to both reports.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, if it's all right, could I introduce our guest from Ghent? And then I can introduce the report after he goes. Thank you. Committee, just I know that Councillor Arthur has emailed you. We've got very kindly Mr. Peter Van Sevenen is here. We can see him on the screen. He's recently retired from, but he was for 24 years he worked for the Mobility Department in Ghent Council, and since retirement he's still handling on behalf of the City of Ghent requests from other cities, for example, us. So I approached the City of Ghent and asked, as part of knowledge sharing and as part of different experience for the cities, and Peter responded, and we've spoken a couple of times. He's not here to endorse our plans. He's not looked at I've not discussed any of the plans that are before you today with Peter. He's here to talk about his experience in Ghent and some of the challenges perhaps and some of the successes. So, Peter, if you can hear me, can I hand over to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Got about 15
Okay.
minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, all of you, and I will try to share a PowerPoint. Have a look if it works. A moment. Can you see now the PowerPoint?
Not quite yet.
Not yet, Peter.
Not quite yet.
Not yet. I have still another. Does it work now? Apparently it doesn't work. Well, I have another try, but normally it should work. This well, we have like this, and then
Yeah.
you can see it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, thank
So
you.
I will talk briefly about the circulation plan in the city of Ghent, which was introduced now 7 years ago. First of all, I have to present the city of Ghent is in the north of Belgium, the Dutch-speaking part, and it has about 270,000 inhabitants. And here you see the city. We have an outer ring road, R4, you can see it here, and the diameter is about 15 kilometers, but we will speak mainly about the central area, which is this one, and we have an inner ring road called the R40, this is this one, and the diameter is about 3 kilometers, and the length of the R40 is 11 kilometers, and there is about 7.5 square kilometers of area within this R40, and about 50,000 people are living there. We have a number of key moments in our mobility planning. We had a cycling plan. You just have to know we invested quite a lot in cycling infrastructure with good success. And then I have to talk very, very briefly about a mobility plan for the inner city, which was introduced 25 years ago. Why we did it? Well, this was the city heart of Ghent, let's say in the late 80s of the previous century. At that time, we already had some pedestrianized streets, mainly the commercial streets, but there were islands separated one from another. And in between these pedestrian streets, you had lots and lots of traffic. And this is really the city heart. We needed traffic lights infested with cars. And at just a moment, then a city councillor stood up and said, this is enough. We want to create a large pedestrian area. And in 97, so we linked all those commercial streets to create a big pedestrian area, and of course we refurbished, we redesigned the whole area, and this area is now just for pedestrians, public transport, and bicycles. So you might say, okay, everything is all right. Why did you need another plan in 2017? Well, that's mainly because the population growth in Ghent. We came from 225,000 at the turn of the century, and now we are about at 270,000, meaning more people and actually also more cars. And what we've experienced, here you see our R40, this ring road, and this shaded area in the middle was our large pedestrian area, and everything was fine in the pedestrian area, haven of peace. But once you exited the pedestrian area, you were confronted again with lots and lots of car traffic. And actually, we made the calculations, and the access to Ghent from the motorways is from the south. And we saw that at least 11% of all car traffic in this area entered the city from the ring road, bypassed the pedestrian area, and went out in the north somewhere. So this was pure transit traffic. And then we saw about 28% was traffic, let's say, having a destination in the north, but nevertheless entered the city, bypassed the pedestrian area to reach destination instead of using the ring road. And even 9% was internal traffic, internal car traffic within this area. So the conclusion was we have far too much motorized traffic in the city center, and we should do something about it. And just like 20 years ago, another city councillor stood up and said, enough, we want to change that. So what was the idea? To decrease the car traffic in this whole area comprised by this inner ring road R40. And our goals were, of course, to increase livability by keeping motorized transit traffic out of the city and to have a better accessibility for all modes. How did we do it? Well, we divided the whole area into sectors. And going from one sector to another is now only possible using the ring road, and cars have to use more the sitting ring road to reach their destination. And we had some extra measures also to facilitate modal shift. But as a scheme, you could say the before situation is here on the left with the inner ring road, and then you could access the city center. You could bypass the pedestrian area and exit in the north. And after, it's only possible to enter a sector, but if you want to go to another sector, you have to exit again, use the ring road and enter another sector. The same if you're coming from the south and you want to go north, you are obliged now to use this ring road. You can't transit through the city center anymore. So we have these 6 sectors, and we have the car-free city center or first pedestrian area. And by the way, we extended this pedestrian area also a little bit 7 years ago. How do we prevent traffic going through? Well, we put blocks, bollards, paints, plants, and benches on the street. But in the end, we use ANPR cameras. And I understood it's not possible yet in Scotland, but for us, this was the most convenient solution. We have permits for the car-free zones, and the permits are required 24 hours and 7 days a week. It's a digital system, and the supervision is with the cameras, a fine of 58 euros. And we have permits for certain categories, all different conditions, but inhabitants, deliveries, medical personnel, works, maintenance, transport of disabled persons, emergencies. Especially for mobility impaired people. In Belgium, they can be a holder of a parking card for disabled, and they can then get a permit for their own car or even for another one's car, one per day. And we have also reserved parking places at the edge of the pedestrian area. So we built we are rebuilding public space temporarily, but in the end it will be done definitely. We provide a place to sit, eat, or even play. We have new pedestrian areas, and especially for Ghent, we have also some streets, few of them, but not all, are pedestrians only from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Even cyclists are not allowed. And this was not a very easy decision because people in Ghent like to travel and ride their bikes. But there were easy alternative routes, so the detour wasn't so big. And then we had accompanying measures. We had a number of park and ride stations in the periphery of the city, and 2 of them have a free bus ride, and it's a bus service frequent until well after midnight. We also improved the traffic flow on the city ring road, and we have also for people with mobility difficulties, we have bike taxis. And especially for mobility impaired people, like I said before, we have a permit to enter the pedestrian area, getting in and out. So any results? Well, we could talk about modal shift, traffic livability, safety, accessibility, and impact of the traffic plan on trade. A modal shift, oh yes, we had one, and especially towards the bike, because Ghent, we will see it in just a moment, Ghent is really a bicycle city. The bicycles in and out of the city center went up with 60%, in the city center 50%, and we saw a very net decrease in motorized traffic and a slight increase in use of public transport. On walking, there was no overall effect. And here you can see the evolution of the model split in Ghent during the last 10 years. We do household surveys every 3 years. And in 2012, the car stood as a passenger stood at 47.8%, and it went down ever since. And at the last survey was 3 years ago. It was about at a third of all journeys made by car as a passenger. On the contrary, the bicycle which had 21.7 in 2012, went up, and again, about 1/3 of all journeys of the people of Ghent is now made by bicycle. You see, the walking is just stable around 13–14%, and we did have an increase in public transport. Just before COVID, it was 8.7, but then it went down. It came with COVID. I guess that happened everywhere, and they still didn't recover all the passengers they lost during COVID. Traffic livability, accessibility, of course, there's better air quality when there are less cars, and we took off 60% of transit traffic, and in many of the residential streets and main roads within the area of the R40, there is less traffic, and especially we have a strong reduction of traffic jams. We have virtually no traffic jams anymore within the area of the R40. For cars travel, well, surprisingly, the travel time to the city center has decreased. Why? Because if you really have a destination in the city center, for instance, you want to go to a parking garage in the city center, you are not hindered anymore by the transit car traffic, so that's better. But of course, as we have expected, the travel time on the ring road increased. And especially for cyclists, there are now far less cars. And you should know our city center is medieval. We don't have wide roads, so it's very difficult to build cycle paths. So these streets have far less cars. It's just safer and more pleasant to ride. And moreover, it's now, especially for travel towards the area, it's now also just faster with a bike than with a car. So we had this increase in bicycle traffic. Some observations about the impact of the traffic ban on trade. Well, most shops are still thriving. However, we see a kind of shift in some specialized stores with household goods, electro, that attract public from outside. They had some difficulties, and we see a movement towards the outskirts of the city. However, it's also linked to changing behavior, online shopping, and it's an observation you can make for any Flemish city, whether they have a circulation plan or not. So it's not especially due to this circulation plan, but more or less a general evolution. Very important is that you need to have accompanying measures, and for instance, these park and ride sites with the shuttle bus system must be sufficiently well known. And very important as well is retail promotion. We have a special organization, it's called Pure Ghent, and it's involved in city marketing and in creating events in the city center. And then you also have the perception, I'll come to it later, the perception. You have to go against perception, because after the circulation plan, it was strongly mediatized. It was in television, and journalists. Good news is no news. So that was mostly the people who were against the plan came into the news, and so the perception arose. Oh, it's now very difficult to reach Ghent, which is not true. But you have to make good communication and have a dialogue with the industry. Finally, some short words about participation, information, and communication. The plan as such isn't so expensive, because we just had to change traffic signs overnight, but it took us 2.5 to 3 years to have information, communication, and participation sessions. We had various channels for information. We had at least 2 meetings per sector, but then we had lots and lots and lots of conversation with the public at large, specific target groups, shopkeepers, schools, neighborhood committees, quite a lot. We also engaged 2 Mobi coaches, 2 people who got to businesses, to enterprises, whatever you want, especially the homes for elderly people. They went everywhere explaining the scheme. And afterwards, we had also a citizens forum for evaluation. We had communication before, during the scheme. You see here at the right upright. You see, we had stewards on the street explaining the system when it was introduced. And finally, also after, as I told, you have to beat the perception that it's very difficult now to reach Ghent. It isn't. You just have to make a little detour. We even had some campaign, and it reads another time to Ghent, well, a piece of cake. So that was in short what we've done in Ghent.
Oh, look. Almost a full house here. So Peter, thank you for coming along today. And I have to say, I did say, Daisy, can you really get through all these slides in such a short period of time? And you have done it, and you've given it justice. Mm-hmm. So we're here, we've asked you to come along today because we want to learn from you. And obviously Ghent isn't Edinburgh and Edinburgh isn't Ghent. We're both quite different cities, but there is things we can learn, I think. Do other towns and cities approach you to learn from you as well? And have others followed your path?
Oh, yes. So as you might know, I'm retired, but I spent half my time of receiving visitors, guiding them through the city or giving presentations like this. We have lots and lots of people coming to Ghent to see what we've done, yes. And many, especially people who want to have less traffic in their city centres. And we have lots of visitors, yes, indeed.
Excellent. Rachel is suggesting the next tech committee meeting should be in Ghent. We'll see how that goes.
I'd be happy to. I'll be happy to guide you around.
Councillor, perhaps, Councillor Vagenda.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. I wanted to ask two questions. I wanted to ask one question about how the waterways in Ghent helped, or have they helped in moving people around in any way as an alternative to roads? And the second one is about tourism and what arrangements were made for tourists who arrive by coach, because here in Edinburgh we have a high level of coach tourism, and what arrangements you made to cope with those so that they kept coming.
Yeah. Well, first question, the waterways. No, we don't have water transport, functional water transport, or our tourist boats on the waterways, but that's not for regular transport. However, they help because when you have to divide the city in sectors, by using the rivers as the boundaries, it's quite easy. You just have to shut the bridge for through car traffic, and you can have a sector. Another thing is we use the tow paths of the waterways entering Ghent as ways of making cyclists coming to the city. For the coaches, we have, well, let's say it's a bit off record, but before COVID, we were trying to have a scheme where coaches were obliged to park at the edge of the city and then could enter by just walking. Coaches, I think in the future we will have a permit system with coaches, and they will only allow if they into the city center if they have a destination in hotels. So if they convey passengers who are going to the hotel with their luggage, then we can get in and out. But we are a bit reluctant of coaches. We have the problem as well. They are not allowed in the pedestrian area, of course, unless, again, if their hotel is in the pedestrian area. But we see they are causing lots of problems because, again, we are narrow streets and they can block streets. So we're not quite having definite rules for the coaches. But I think the idea is to get them as much as possible out of the city centre.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you have a question, Councillor O'Neill? No, Councillor Bandel.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your brilliant presentation. I think we have a lot to learn from you and other European cities, and it gives me a lot of hope to see that it has been done before. If we approve the plans today, as I hope we will, there will be an option at some point to implement changes incrementally or all in one go. And I believe in Ghent you did all of the changes in one go, and I was wondering what you think the benefits of that approach are.
Well, if you do it in one go, you just have to, as I said, it's very important to have communication, information, participation, but by doing it in one go, you can use the same process for the whole city, and you see the effects immediately in the whole inner area city, the whole inner area of the city. We could have done, let's say, started with a quarter or just a neighborhood, but then you don't see the whole benefits for the city. By doing it on a grand scale as we have done it, you see immediately the results in more quiet streets, more agreeable streets, more livelier streets actually with pedestrians, cyclists. And I think that's the big advantage of doing it all in one time.
I'm just working my way along the committee because everybody put their hand up here. Councillor Aston.
Thanks very much, Peter. That was a really helpful presentation. It's probably one that all of our councillors here in Edinburgh could do with seeing, actually. But Councillor Bandel just asked the question that I was going to ask, but thank you.
Okay.
Councillor McFarlane.
Thank you. Edinburgh, part of the problem in the city centre of Edinburgh is the movement of freight and goods and heavy goods vehicles. So partly because we have a thriving retail and kind of leisure sector, many kegs of beers, for example. So I'm wondering how Ghent dealt with the movement of goods to and from that kind of the commercial aspect of the city.
Well, we have the same problem, of course, as all the larger cities with a thriving city centre. Actually, we have also a lot of pubs. Ghent is also a tourist town. But, well, first of all, we have the access to the pedestrian area is limited. You can only go in it after 6 o'clock in the evening or before 11 in the morning. So there is no deliveries possible between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless you have cargo bikes. We have a cargo bike scheme and we try to develop it more and more. We see it more and more used, but of course the really heavy deliveries, you can't replace it. And for the moment being, we have no restriction in tonnage, so all lorries are actually allowed to go into the city, but before 11 and after 6 o'clock. And we have also some, for if there are works going on, let's say house building, we have a kind of gentleman agreement with the building sites that they won't get to the building site with lorries during the time schools are beginning or ending, because lots in Flanders or in Ghent, a lot of children are going by bike to school.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dublin.
Thank you, Peter. That was inspirational, actually. Very good. Thank you very much. One of the concerns that's voiced about the proposals in Edinburgh is displaced traffic. So traffic that will no longer be allowed to use the city centre, being displaced and ending up causing problems in more peripheral areas, more residential areas. Just wondered what your experience was, if that is what happens, or if there's modal shift accompanied with the transformation. Okay.
Well, the main effect was, of course, more traffic on the city ring road. But the city ring road is a dual carriageway. It has 2 lanes in each direction, so it's also for once it's a wide road. So for once it has some, let's say, environmental capacity. So you could have some more vehicles, and as I told, we did some adjustment on this ring road. So the shift in car traffic was mainly from the inner city to the city ring road, and not so much to neighborhoods. Secondly, of course, we had a modal shift, as you can see. We had far more bicycles. And thirdly, you can also have a shift in timing of the journeys. I don't know whether it's the case in Edinburgh, but here we've calculated that at least 25 to 33% of all traffic in peak time doesn't need to be there. It's not home to school or home to work travel. It's just leisure time, shopping motives. So people could postpone or choose another time to make the journey. So you have a shift as well, and that purpose. And also, if there are some transport planners among you, in transport, there's a transport law that says the more infrastructure you give to cars, the more cars you get. But the inverse is also true. The less space you give to cars, then you have what we in transport science is called evaporation of traffic. You can see that there is also less traffic in the whole, and that's what we actually experienced. We saw, of course, the diversion to the city ring road, but we saw also in total, especially in peak hour, less car traffic. Could very well be that there was a time shift.
Councillor Osler, did you have a question?
I didn't put my hand up, but I'd be delighted to ask a question, if that's okay.
You may.
Yes, no, thank you very much indeed. I'm fascinated by your proposal. You talked about the link road, which is really interesting. In terms of population, how many individuals live sort of within the link road and outside of it?
You mean the ring road? So within the ring road, there is about 50,000 people. That's the city, really the city center. Outside, we have about 220,000 people living because we have had mergers of municipalities. We have also outerlying districts who are 7, 8, or even more kilometers from the city center. But as a matter maybe interesting for you, we are also now trying to implement such traffic schemes in the outerlying districts.
Councillor Dijkstra-Downey.
Thanks, convener, en hartelijk bedankt, Peter, voor uw interessante presentatie. I have a lot of questions, but can I just ask one point of clarification and one question, if that's okay, convener? Yes. I was interested in your statistics about the modal shift. When you said 6% increase in public transport, did that include the buses of the park and ride, or was that just your regular public transport?
It includes all urban and regional transport. So the buses and the trams. See, the urban buses, trams are always urban, but also the regional buses. It didn't include the train, but the train has about a share of 4% of all journeys of the people of Ghent.
Okay, thank you. I guess my substantive question is, with hindsight, is there anything that you would do differently?
Oh, a number of things. For instance, the use of word, well, since you are Dutch, we've used the word knip or cutting for the boundary between sectors. And in Dutch, people thought, well, you will cut us from the world. And now we use the word traffic filter, which is a far more neutral word. And actually, it is a traffic filter because the boundaries can still be passed by cyclists, pedestrians, public transport, taxis, and some very restricted people who have very restricted permit holders. So that's the first one. The second one is that we should have even more done about the perception, because, you know, such plans, there are always adversaries, but even when the point of no return is reached, they still will be against the plan even afterwards, and they'll try to spread the word that your city is bleeding and is on the verge of collapse, and you have to beat that perception. That's very, very important, and maybe we did too little about it because, again, it was very much mediatized. And you have those internet trolls, as a bunch of people, 10 people can make believe that your city is dead if they just by using social media. So maybe there we should have done a bit more there as well.
Councillor Cowdery.
Thank you very much, convener, and thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. I found it very interesting, very informative. My question is slightly like the last question, and it does feel a bit like an interview question. And it is, what were the most challenging problems that you had to find solutions to, and are there any negatives that you could tell us that have come out through the implementation of your plan?
Well, I think one of the most challenging things were the permits, the discussion we had about permits. Who has to have a permit? We have two kinds of permits. You have a permit to enter the pedestrian area, and that's not so restricted. It's, of course, the inhabitants of the pedestrian area, it's the deliveries, it's the works and maintenance, medical personnel. But we had a lot of discussion about the permits to cross the sector boundaries. So that's now very restricted, medical personnel, and it's also the transport of people, mobility impaired people, the official organizations that can cross these boundaries. It's very limited, but you have to think very well about who you're going to give a permit on what conditions, and that took quite a long time. So you should prepare this very carefully. Because in the beginning we were too liberal, meaning we just said, well, before 11 and after 6 o'clock you don't need a permit for the area, and you could deliver between 11 and 6. But then we saw that the good delivery people said, oh, we will first go to Bruges and Antwerp, and in the afternoon we go to Ghent, because we can get a permit anyway in the afternoon. So think very good about the way you have to, how you will handle those permits. And negative, well, try again to talk to as much as possible, and also the people who are against it or who are afraid of something, to reassure them, because if they reassure, they will maybe have less emotional responses, because it's very often just emotional. I will have to make a detour, but in the end, it's not such a great change, because you can reach by car any point in Ghent as before. Just the only thing is you now have to make a detour. So communication is very, very important.
Thank you. So, Councillor Cowdery, we have to reassure people who have concerns. With that, Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much for coming along, Peter. It's been very informative. I have 3 questions, very short answers. I know your time is precious. Did you have the funding in place before you went ahead with your plans and started consulting with residents on businesses on what you wanted to do in Ghent? And also you spoke about your city's ring road, which now carries far more traffic around your city, so it's avoiding your city centre. Did you have to do any upgrades to that ring road, and did you put more park and rides around that ring road? That's my 2 questions. If you can answer those, I have got a third, but I know time is short. Thank you.
Yes. Your first question was about...
Did you have your funding in place to make all these plans before you went to the residents and businesses?
Yes, but of course, the plan in itself, the scheme in itself, it's not that expensive. If you just would calculate the cost of putting in place some traffic signs, yes, and of course some ANPR cameras, but that's not a big deal. It's not so expensive. The most expensive part was the preparation in information, communication, participation, this 3-year-long process we had. And of course, during the time and even nowadays, we were investing, for instance, in cycling infrastructure. And yes, but especially for the plan, yes, of course, we had the funding, but again, it was not such a huge amount. Then yes, we had more park and rides. We installed extra park and rides. And as for the ring road, it's well, in Flanders is the main road, as the ring road is under the management of the Flemish region. And yes, we did some upgrades. We had traffic lights, put in traffic lights where there were none to have more smoother traffic. We adjusted some traffic light schemes, and also the junctions, the layouts of these intersections were sometimes changed. Yes, we did some improvements, but again, that wasn't huge money. of course, it costs a bit, but it's not tens of millions of euros that were spent there.
Well, thank you very much. It was interesting to hear that you had your finances in place before you went ahead with this, and you say the cost was not a lot. Just can you give me an idea of what the cost was?
I think this is very, very difficult, and I should ask our bookkeeping people if we have really a cost, but I guess the participation was a couple of million euros because we had engaged a communication firm. We had 2 people extra, a couple of million of euros. But I can ask and come back to you or via Daisy if we have more figures on that.
No, that's fine. I really appreciate you answering my questions and clarifying those points. There was just one final thing that popped up. I was doing a lot of research on Ghent. It's a fascinating city, and you go around by walking, wheeling and cycling, and so many people use bicycles across the whole of the city centre. So I noticed when I was doing some research, and I wonder if you can maybe just tell me what the residents of Ghent think about this, that police now in Ghent are having more interactions with cyclists, and they're handing out fines for using their mobile phone, ignoring pedestrians, going through red lights, cycling on pavements. How has this been implemented, and how have the people reacted to this? Because obviously it's changing people's cycling behaviour, making them better cyclists.
Well, of course, if you have it with car drivers, you have it with cyclists. Most of them are very obey to the laws of traffic, so there's no problem. But you have a problem group with car drivers and with cyclists. So, and in fact, if you want to promote cycling, you have to also to address the bad behavior by some cyclists, and therefore. We do it because then some of the people of Ghent think, oh, the cyclists, they can do everything. You don't do anything about driving through red or driving at night without lights. And therefore, and also, for instance, in the pedestrian street where they're not allowed. So by doing enforcement of bad cyclist behavior, actually you help to clear the image of the cyclist. You can say, okay, we know some behavior bad, but we address it. And then people who are against cyclists can say, okay, you are doing at least something about it. But as a whole, investment in cycling infrastructure is going on and will go on for the next years. That's for sure.
Okay, so I think, Councillor Bandel has a final question for you.
I thought if Councillor Munro gets 3 questions, I can ask a second one. I was really interested in what you said about participation and engagement, because I feel like a lot of the time when we do conventional, face-to-face participation and engagement here, it ends up being quite confrontational and quite toxic, and no one's having a good time. So I would be interested if you used any particular methods of engagement and participation to get maybe a little bit more of that dialogue.
Well, the most important thing is what you shouldn't do is having a bench in front of 4 people talking before a large audience of 300 people. Then our experience is the one who dares to speak, and if he's against and he shouts, the rest of the people are afraid of saying something. So we usually have discussion tables. Smaller discussion tables with, let's say, 10, 15 people. And then it's very interesting because then adversaries and people who are supporting the plan go in discussion with each other. And that's very interesting because then someone will say, okay, why all those measures? I want to drive my car here. The other one will say, okay, but my child, 11 years old, goes through this street and it's far too dangerous with all the cars. So you have, and vice versa, someone would say, okay, but I have heavy goods and I can't answer, and so on and so on. But the discussion between people is very interesting. It shouldn't be just the authorities or the politicians towards the people, but let people themselves discuss. The second thing, even with politicians, our city councillor who was responsible for the introduction of the plan, even had what was called a living room meeting. So you could invite him to your living room, provided you invited some neighbors. And he said, well, the 2 years before the circulation plan, I did have very, very little evenings off. So he was very, very much involved.
Okay, that sounds like quite an interesting way of doing things. I think Councillor Dyke-Stradauni and I met someone in the living room actually, and we benefited from fantastic biscuits, which I can still remember. Yeah. So Peter, thanks for coming along today. I mean, I was in Ghent a long time ago on a cycling trip, which I think started here in Rosyth via ferry across to Zeebrugge. Yeah, yeah. So I can't remember too much about Ghent, but perhaps just the beer, perhaps because Belgium, of course, is famous for its beers. But it sounds like since then you've made Ghent a better place to live and bring up a family. So well done to you. And I think all of us are looking on what you've done there with some envy. And hopefully all of us as well are going to try to catch up. I think we'll all be tempted to travel to Ghent, so no doubt we'll be in touch with you. But if you're ever in Edinburgh, please let us know, and you'll be very welcome to come along.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your time.
And a lot of success. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, Peter has given us a lot to think about, I think. I think that was a really positive and forward-looking presentation from him, actually. And like I say, I did have worries about how long it was going to take to get through his slides, but he went through them in a way where he was able to communicate quite a lot to us, actually. There's a lot to learn from how he presented that. I think, though, it's best that we spend time thinking about what he had to say over lunch, and then we'll come back and we'll move on to Daisy in our presentation of the reports. So can we come back at 1:30, so 35 minutes? Is that okay? Thank you. A refreshing lunch, and I think sorry, if we can get started, how usually okay, sorry, Councillor Ursula. So that was quite a good build up to lunch actually with Peter. It was quite insightful, very positive and forward looking. Gives us something to think about. Obviously, it's not a cut and paste job, but we can see that some of the same challenges that we heard about through the questions we will face as well. So different context, but same challenges. Daisy.
Thank you, Convener. If it's all right, I might just very briefly, maybe a couple of minutes, set the context, just because it's two big reports. So thank you for bearing with me. I just, as I said, like to provide very quick context for both the reports. I'm not going to belabor what is in the reports because you've seen that, and we've had briefings, and obviously there's scrutiny that's coming for that. But I just wanted to kind of step back and talk about why we're doing this, and a reminder to all of us here what we've been asked to go away and look at and why. So within our city mobility plan and the previous reports, we've got two previous reports on the circulation plan, we've acknowledged that streets are not just travel corridors, but they're important ecosystems for places, destinations in their own right. They play an important role in adding to the city's green and blue networks, helping to combat climate change, enhancing biodiversity, and improving well-being. Compared to other UK cities, the proportion of land given over to street space in Edinburgh is quite small. And so the pressure to accommodate all types of traffic, as well as parking, as well as everything else that we want to do on our streets, the aspirations that we have for our climate agenda, while still giving priority to certain travel modes in some places, we know results in congestion and difficult traveling conditions, especially for people walking, wheeling, and cycling along many routes, and driving, as well as we saw in Councillor Moat's slides today. And this challenge contributes to public transport disruption, limits provision of connected and safe active travel networks, and it exacerbates pollution, both noise pollution and air pollution. We know that congestion significantly impacts on the city's economic potential. In Edinburgh, it disproportionately affects those living in the most deprived neighbourhoods, and those running micro-businesses and small and medium-sized enterprises across the city. Global cities use street space rationally to their competitive economic advantage, enhancing socioeconomic outcomes for everyone. We are so fortunate in Edinburgh to have an excellent public transport system and some very walkable, compact urban areas, including our city centre. Yet our historic network of streets, especially in the city centre, is subject to intense competition for space. Throughout the 20th century, and until quite recently, street design has tended to prioritize motorized traffic, especially cars, and the resulting traffic-dominated streets damage public health, well-being, and safety. The severe communities from key services, detract from beautiful and sensitive historic areas, and make it harder to travel around the city. And they make it harder for those who need to drive. There are many, many people who need to drive, and this makes it harder for them. As a rapidly growing and densifying city, street space is at a renewed premium. And to reach net zero for transport, the city needs to act 12 times faster than it has across the last 2 decades in this area. And that, for me, is a very, very sobering thought, the pace of change, the urgency of change that's required. And that's what has formed its part in these 2 reports. The citywide consultation that we reported to committee on in November has helped to shape the Council's priorities for the delivery of actions, and as we brought forward to yourselves, a place-based approach and a program of investment across the city to have that place-based approach for that. It's helped capture feedback on difficult decisions, some of which I promised to bring here today. I think I fulfilled that brief. Challenges and trade-offs that will be required to deliver those actions within the constraints of limited street space. And it's helped us facilitate the understanding of interrelationships between actions, conflicts, to maximize opportunities for alignment. The reports in front of you today have used the outputs from the consultation and the data and technical work that has been ongoing in the background in order to present a clear set of priorities, focusing on the city centre, on town centres and main arterial corridors, which aim to give direction, a starting point to how street space will be reallocated to prioritize travel modes, depending on the role and the nature of the street, and priorities for placemaking that include greening, dwell space to support the vibrancy of streets, and as mentioned before, well-being, climate resilience, and biodiversity. I'm not pretending to sit here and tell members that any of this is easy. You've heard from Ghent, it wasn't easy for them. The circulation plan has taken on some really difficult issues, especially demand management, road space reallocation. I'm very, very grateful to my colleagues here who've really, just gone right into the detail and brought forward for scrutiny from yourselves series of network maps, specific options for the city centre and key corridors, all of which involve decisions which are not easy. We've set out potential impacts on traffic. We've been honest about the impacts that will be on road traffic, on public transport. We've talked about issues around displacement of traffic and the work that will be needed in terms of the next steps if this is approved. Some big challenges, but hopefully also some real opportunities to address some of the environmental, social, and economic issues I mentioned at the start. If members approve this report, we have a lot of work to do to set out the operational aspects, the details of implementation and delivery, and we will return to committee with those details. The maps that you have in front of you will change, they'll be amended, they'll be tweaked, and we'll come back to committee anytime that happens, either with a business bulletin or a proper report. Every 2 years, as we know, the CMP is reviewed, the circulation plan will be reviewed as part of that. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much. I know you've had a lot to read. I'm very happy to take questions.
So thank you for that, Daisy. And I just want to start by thanking you, Daisy, and your team. You've got Ruth and Phil here today, but I know that there's been a lot of work went into this over a number of years. And some of it going back to when I first came here in the 90s, we're starting to get much closer to delivery. So thank you. When we met Peter last week, he said people with visions should go to the doctors. And that stuck with me, but I think the leadership you've shown has been fantastic on this, and your team supporting you well, which has been really good. So thank you. Do we have any questions then? Sorry, people with their hands up. Just so we're back on everyone type situation again. So this time I'll go from the Conservatives round to Councillor Fachenda. So, Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you very much for the report. It was exceptionally detailed, considering the amount of pages that I and my colleagues have had to read through, and I have screeds and screeds of questions that I think need to be answered, but there isn't the time which goes into detail and various things that I find exceptionally worrying and concerning in the City Mobility Plan. If we can go to Appendix 4, in my notes here I've got, generally it is notable that the costing and implementation of public transport improvements seems to be one of the areas in which progress has been most difficult, Daisy. Presumably largely due to the difficulty of securing funding and organisational questions with Lothian buses. This is something that alarms me, and it is somewhat alarming, as is public transport, which will be to replace much of the proposed reduction in cars going our city. So in the event that public transport should lag behind measures to reduce the ease of private vehicles using the city centre, it's natural to assume that ingress and egress of the centre would be severely impeded, were public transport improvements to be found impracticable. Such a situation would be rendered permanent to the detriment of all concerned, but especially the elderly and disabled, not least those on concessionary bus travel, is one of the areas over which there is presently funding difficulty. So this whole thing pins on costings and monies. How are we getting on with that?
Thank you, Councillor Munro. You're right. I think public transport is, as I said, we're very, very fortunate to have a fantastic bus service, not just in Lothian, but other operators as well. We're also very, very lucky now that we have a tram line, which hopefully, potentially, what happens in the future might expand and become a network. What we need to do is exactly as you said, if we want that modal shift from the private car into public transport, we need to invest more money in our public transport to make it even better and even stronger. That means investing, first of all, in our own teams and making sure that our teams have the skills, the resilience, the ability to face up to that challenge. Better partnership working with both Lothian buses, Edinburgh trams, and other operators, which is already in train. Better, in terms of the work that we're doing with Scottish Government, the regional work that we're doing with WITA bus partnership, the key corridors, we need money to invest in that. But there are, if this plan is approved, we can, that is what the priority will be, is to put bus and public transport at the heart of what we're doing. We have money to do what, we have money for projects for public transport. I think the more we invest, the better it'll get.
Just to add, sorry, Convener, can I just add briefly? It's an extremely fair challenge, Councillor. Two things, in partly in response. When the previous managing director of Lothian Buses was in his post, Richard Hall, he used to say to me, and I think this is echoed by what the current managing director says to the convener pretty regularly, which was the key issue for buses particularly, was congestion on the network. That the reason why you see frustration of passengers, yes, the signage might be another matter as you heard today, but at the moment, passenger frustration is about buses getting stuck on the network. And one of the key points of this plan is to try and make the ease and the reliability of journey time for buses more effective. And that does mean road space reallocation. I'm sure you can all name particular bits of road space in your ward, I certainly can, which become bottlenecks. And what this is tried to do is, I suppose, trying to answer the objective, how can we make it easier for buses to get reliably round the city, which is not a financial issue, it's actually a policy issue. And secondly, just briefly, if I can, Councillor, Gareth and I have been talking about this a lot recently. I remember some time ago, the previous administration, I think, one of our colleagues who's now retired, actually, Will Garrett, talking to members when we did an earlier transport strategy about the relationship between public transport and car use from those from without the city coming in, as opposed to journeys within the city. And I don't know, it's probably in this report somewhere, Daisy, the amount of journey time that's now coming from the wider region. Making sure that people don't feel they need to bring their car into the city to travel in from, for example, the growing communities in East Lothian, Mid Lothian and so on, means this kind of approach, which is a multimodal approach to key arrival nodes. And if people want to travel to certain locations by car, park and rides, most obviously, and then quickly and reliably get into the city. And this plan is trying to address both those issues, both that regional issue and that within city congestion issue.
Thank you very much. That's most helpful, and it's interesting that you've brought up the amount of traffic that's coming in to Edinburgh, and that's something I feel is lacking in this, Daisy, because we are seeing people coming from East Lothian and Mid Lothian, the amount of houses that are being built in there. But when reading this, and when the public will read this, and those that are watching now will read this, Daisy, they will think, why am I being punished in Edinburgh? Why are all these roads closing? Why is there a potential, as being quoted by the convener, that I'm going to be charged to move around the city, where those out with coming into the city, I don't think has been factored into this at all, Daisy. And as we heard from Peter and Gant, they had their funding in place before they made any major decisions. We don't. They implemented park and rides and infrastructure on their bypass ring road around the city. We haven't. And I have grave concerns about the city mobility plan that we haven't thought about that, which Paul Lawrence has rightly brought up about the amount of traffic that's coming into the city, Daisy. And as you said, you know, the buses get stuck. Yes, they do, but the buses don't go where everybody needs to get to. And if we're closing north and south of the city, Daisy, you're going to put all the traffic in my area, because Lothian Road will be the only road north and south. You close the Mound, you close the bridges, you close the Cowgate, you're reducing the amount of buses along Princess Street. It's going to be exceptionally difficult. How can you explain that in layman's terms to my residents and residents in the city as a whole, please? Thank you.
Councillor Munro, just similar to earlier, it's not Daisy that'll be doing these things, it's the committee.
I understand that, but obviously the report's here, Councillor Arthur, and I would like to ask Daisy on it because it was her and her team, and she has more knowledge than I have from her background working in active travel for Sestrans, which I don't have. So obviously your knowledge is more than mine.
Maybe oh, sorry.
So Daisy, in the response, I think it'd be quite, because I think earlier on we heard from one of the deputations about the Bus Partnership Fund, and I think that's at the core of solving some of the problems that Councillor Munro spoke about. And obviously there is a tension there just now, but I know you have been thinking about how we can work around that in the interim period. So it'd be good if, as you respond to this point about regional transport, but the importance of the Bus Partnership Fund and how we're hoping to work around that in the interim.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. And you're absolutely 100% right. You know, you cannot have a city centre solution without it being a regional solution, and which is why we work very, very hard with partners across the regions, with our neighbouring local authorities, and with Sestran. Sorry, no, I used to work for Sustran, which is different. This is Sestran, which is the Regional Transport Partnership. And you know, there's several groups, you know, part of the regional framework. There's a transport appraisal board. There's different groups that look at various aspects of transport from that regional lens. So just to reassure committee that, you know, this plan is not done in isolation of any regional conversations. It is very much plugged into that. Sestran has a regional transport strategy that we contributed to, and that addresses some of your issues around how traffic moves into Edinburgh, not just Edinburgh, but you know, across the region. And one of the things that the National Transport Strategy sets out is that regional aspect of mass transit and bus rapid transit, which brings me to Councillor Arthur's point about the Bus Partnership Fund. So yes, we were disappointed to hear that the Bus Partnership Fund has been paused. We met the Transport Minister last week, and she was quite clear in saying that it's a pause, it's not cancelled. So we have amended our work around Bus Partnership Fund this year, and we're hoping that, you know, next year this fund will come back. So our work around bus priority and bus partnership does not stop. It needs to be tweaked. But yes, you know, Bus Partnership Fund was a big part of that. Sorry, Paul, did you want to come in?
I'll just say that there's absolutely no question, Councillor, that both multimodal interchange, So between different transport modes, not just at the existing park and rides, but for example around suburban rail. So, I live on the Borders railway line. We need to think about the different modes and how they work together. That is a regional conversation. And as Daisy says, we are having those regional conversations. We do need to expand park and ride. You're absolutely right. And if that's not in here, then it is in the wider city mobility plan. We need to move on that. I actually don't think a lot of these actions in here necessarily will cost that much. The cost in this work comes from heavy engineering. So members will have seen the city centre West East cycle link taking a long time, as you heard from the deputation, to get the relevant permissions, statutory permissions, and then for the work to be done on the ground. But actually, getting better multimodal interchange is not an expensive piece of work to do. It's actually about coordination between the different parts of the system. And if you are implying, Councillor, or saying directly, which I think you are, that we need to get better at that, I think you're 100% right.
Thank you. And that
Councillor Monroe, if you don't mind, what we'll do is we'll just work around the rest of the committee and then we can come back to you.
Yes, I was only going to thank
All right,
Paul
okay.
and Daisy, convener, if that was all right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much, convener. I'm glad you raised that. I was going to raise the same because I've got a number of questions, but hopefully we'll go around once or twice. And I want to reiterate or echo something that the convener had said earlier, which is thanks, Daisy, and your team to all the hard work. I think from the first committee that we were in where you raised this, I had said this is a huge and complicated piece of work. And nothing has changed for me. I still find this a huge and complicated piece of work, and trying to get my head around it has been difficult. So thank you for everything you have done. On a sort of big picture question, you mentioned why do we need this? And in it, you mentioned, for example, net zero 2030. Now, another big driver about the whole scheme is a 30% reduction in car kilometres. And by 2030, and bearing in mind that the peak we have achieved was, I think, 17% in 2021, so an awful lot of that would have been down to the pandemic. We now sit at, I think, 7%. Roughly, how realistic do you think it is that we will achieve either or a 30% reduction in car kilometres by 2030 or net zero by 2030, upon which that is the backbone of this entire approach?
Thank you, Councillor Cowdy. And, it's an excellent question. I think the policy set by Council, having declared a climate emergency in 2019, has set the direction for all of us as teams to aim towards both the net zero target of 2030 and the 30% reduction in car kilometres is one of the responses from transport to that the wider net zero targets. I wave my hands a bit too much when I speak, sorry. Will we reach it? I think unless we do something, unless we invest in helping that mode shift to happen, right from bus priority, as Councillor Monroe said, the regional work that needs to happen, investing in active travel, and as Paul was saying, there does not need to be vast sums of money if there's a different approach in how we deliver these. The pace needs to change, as I said at the start. If we are to achieve these goals, transport has to go 12 times faster. I'm relentlessly optimistic. I think this committee has given us some really ambitious, radical challenges to go away and look at, and we've come back to yourselves with that. And I think if we continue the way that we are going, we will be quite a long way there. I think if we can invest more and go faster, that's even better. Sorry, Ruth wants to come in as well.
Just to add to that point as well, Councillor Cowdy, we've got in the City Mobility Plan report, Appendix 12, an analysis that we've done on carbon impact on the reducing car kilometres. So what we found is if we achieve the 30% reduction in car kilometres, we'll get a 19% reduction in carbon emissions by that point. So we know we need to do even more than that, and two particular measures which we are also looking to support is electrification of vehicles as part of that, As well as that is also looking at reduction in mileage of other vehicles as well, so freight and things like that, which is also part of the mix of what the City Mobility Plan's setting out as well.
Thanks for...
Quick follow-up. And I would say, Ruth, yes, I agree with what you said. If we can, then that could be the result. But I suppose, just to say, I think the chances of us hitting net zero or hitting either of those targets is zero. It's not going to happen by 2030. So this is where I'm sort of coming from, is that we've got a plan here which is based around these unachievable targets. And I think, as you said, if we don't do anything, then we're never going to achieve them. So we must try as hard as we can. And for me, us, there is such a radical approach here that isn't achievable. And we have a real worry that it is going to cost an awful lot of money. We don't, as Mr. Lawrence has said, we don't even know how much money it is going to cost. It's going to cost an awful lot of money. And there's a kind of a fundamental platform that we're coming from on that. So sorry, don't have a question. That was just a follow-up statement.
It's okay. Mr. Barwell.
Sorry, I think it's important, councillors, and actually when we heard the presentation earlier from Peter from Ghent, it kind of focused my mind that there are two elements. The strategy that you see, the big number comes from the kind of full picture delivery. So all the public realm improvements, everything I think we want to see as a city. A lot of what we heard from Ghent actually was delivered more through traffic orders and not expensive engineering. And I think it's important that we can kind of focus our attention on saying if the aim is to reduce, protect the essential journeys, and I know there's some debate around what the definition of essential is, and maybe we need to clarify that in a policy at some point, but nevertheless, to achieve that isn't the expensive piece. I was quite envious of some of the regulations that they have in Belgium to allow them to do that. I'll add that to my another list to Transport Scotland at some point in the future, but the point Councillor Mowat made around allowing residents in can be achieved if we have the right regulations. We can do a lot of the impact on disincentivising those non-essential journeys without redesigning the public realm. I think inevitably, and I would expect if you take George Street would be a good example. If we removed parking from George Street tomorrow, I think we would all expect the question of, that's a lot of empty space, what are you going to do with it? That's human instinct, and that's where the kind of public realm. But we are processing probably about 20,000 pay and display transactions a month on George Street. So we as a council have a policy that basically adds to and undermines the target we're trying to achieve. So I think we just need to be clear in this, that when we see that big number, that's the kind of delivery of the full end picture, but the interim steps to get to that can be delivered through kind of less civil engineering interventions and more traffic order interventions.
Ruth, if you don't mind, can I put you on the spot a little bit? If you don't mind. So earlier on, I think Councillor Mowat was saying that the traffic levels in the city were lower than ever, whereas Councillor Monroe was feeling that in her ward they were higher than they had been. So generally speaking, we did have citywide traffic data to the committee, I think, towards the end of last year. Do we know how we're doing within areas within the city, particularly the city centre, in terms of traffic growth or lack of?
Yeah, we've not got it just disaggregated into wards. From the data that we do have captures volume of traffic and also traffic flows as well. So that's where we've got some of the congestion figures. Also in terms of the commuting, which was a point raised earlier, one of the findings around the kind of volume of traffic from the region into Edinburgh is around 45% of all the commuting that goes on in the region is coming into Edinburgh. In the city centre, it's around 37% of cars coming in from outside, and then with the city centre, it's about 81%. So we've got probably the percentages, and then the Department for Transport data, which tells us about volume of traffic, which from memory is about 89% of pre-pandemic levels. It's really bouncing back and very significantly causing that congestion again with the traffic peak times. And
so 37% of the traffic in the city centre comes from outside Edinburgh? Is that what you said?
37% from of the commuting from the region goes and drives into the city centre. Yeah.
So I spoke to a car rental company before Christmas time who are based at the airport, and they said their most frequent destination for car rentals is the city centre of Edinburgh, which I thought was incredible. Councillor Dixon-Downey.
Thank you, Convener, and I'd also like to echo my thanks to you, Daisy, to Ruth and Phil and your teams for rising to the challenge of this committee and coming back to us with an ambitious plan. We really appreciate that. And thank you also for making yourselves available earlier in the week for questions. I know some of us found that really, really useful and allowed us to get through a lot of questions that we don't have to take time up with today. So I have just 2 points of clarification on report 7.2, if that's okay, and they're quite specific, so apologies for that. One is to do with paragraph 4.31, I think, which is about the proposed changes to parking in zones 1 to 8. And the proposed increase in times of the CPZ. And I just wanted to just clarify the status of, if we are deciding to go with your recommendation today, what's the status of that decision on parking? In other words, is that then baked in? Are we going to get another report back? Do permit costs, are they likely to increase as a result? And what notification will residents get of this change? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your kind words for the team as well, and to all councillors so far. Thank you. So essentially, the parking discussion is one I think we had at last tech as well, and I'm sure Gareth will come in with more detail. What we've done is we've put in enough flexibility within the report to say that we'll go away as part of the operations implementation plan. We can go away and look at whether extending the parking into the evenings, into the weekends will help us with the outcomes that we want to achieve. There was a time when we thought we should just put into the report 24/7 parking, but we didn't have data to kind of back that up, which is why we didn't do that. So essentially, if this report is approved, I think what we will do is go away, and as we've said, we'll come back with an implementation plan and an operations plan, which will help provide some of the detail that you've just asked for. I don't know if Gareth, you want to come in?
Just to add to that, Councillor, so there are a couple of other governance checkpoints we would follow, because obviously fees and charges are set through the fees and charges process, and actually the current parking policy of the council is that permits are uplifted in line with inflation. So members, through annual policy assurance, may wish to change that if this strategy is approved, or they may wish to keep it the same. And also traffic orders would be needed to change that, and they would of course go through the quasi-judicial process, which would then get member scrutiny through, as it stands now, licensing subcommittee. So everything we do still then has to follow kind of secondary governance to make sure we are following the policy of the council, and to give that extra layer of scrutiny.
So, and just then, are residents going to be consulted outside of the TRO process, or is that going to be the opportunity for them to hear about this change?
In terms of the changing of a banding of controlled parking zone, is that the question you're relating to? The time banding? I think that was your question, was it?
Sorry, that was partially my question. They're joint questions, or you can understand why. Yeah, I think that, I think obviously residents are supportive of resident parking, of course they are, because of certain things, but there are complications with it. And we've had issues in the past with shared bays and all sorts of things. And I just want to have a surety of the fact that residents will be involved, obviously, in any consultation process, that we're not going to spring something again on them like we did with the shared bay scenario, etc., because I just kind of feel that there are unintended consequences, because we know that some of the zones are massively oversubscribed, and there might be some complications with that. There are areas around, especially areas like churches and so on, where they're utilised for other things in the evening times. So you can understand that I don't want to make enemy the perfect of good, so I would rather that we kind of explore some of the smaller things so that we can take those forward before we start a very lengthy TRO process.
Yeah, so just to reassure, moving away from our existing time provision for, say, resident permit schemes would be a changing policy, so we'd be required to undertake an IIA, we would be required to undertake engagement, so absolutely, Councillor, that would take place.
Just to add to that, Councillor, one of the things that, not just Ghent, but other cities that have implemented approaches like this, the constant has always been communication, and Ghent, as we heard today Peter say, took 2.5, 3 years of development, communication, engagement, all of that before they had the overnight kind of big bang approach, I suppose. So for me, that is a massive learning in terms of how we go away and make sure that any residents are not just informed, but they understand why.
So, Mr. Barwell, would have changed the timing or also require statutory consultation?
A change to the timing would require a new traffic order, and that has statutory consultation. Now, statutory consultation for an order actually is emergency services and public transport operators. That's what we are statutorily required, but as a general rule, we have done engagement with affected residents as part of that process as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Councillor Osler was through. It's a polite way of putting it.
I've got a totally different question. Obviously, I'm not a usual member of tech, so I'm going to leave the slightly kind of more complicated questions and the policy questions to everybody else. Utility companies. Obviously, these are one of the banes of our existence, no offence to the utility companies, but about major roadworks and upheaval and so on. One of the biggest problems that we possibly might have by reducing our major networks and something like that is what then happens. And I'll give an example of what happened obviously in Rayburn Place when they had to remove a gas line. I just wondered how we're going to deal with not only long term, because we've got quite a lot of changes coming in various parts of our city, but also those slightly niggly sort of emergency works, how we're going to manage situations like this.
Thank you, Councillor. This is one that my colleague Cliff raises with me several times, especially as part of this work that we've done. And just to say that, this piece of work has been done, I've been so privileged to have worked across different departments to this. So resilience is one that has come up in discussions. And in the report, we've talked about the fact that we don't have all the answers just yet to how we would, bake in specific questions like that. But if this is approved, then that is something that is front and center of thinking of teams to come in and help, provide that full picture for the next stage. Gareth, did you?
So yeah, that is a very important bit of detail, Councillor. We do consider it. I know some people maybe think we don't, but actually developing this network and factoring in diversions that would need to happen if there were major utility works, ensuring there are emergency vehicle accesses to key locations. We heard from Ghent earlier. But also the other layer we add on is, the privilege of being a world-class festival city is also factoring resilience that allows us to continue using the place as its function as well. So actually, there are probably 3 layers of resilience we need to factor into our plans, but certainly as officers, we're fully aware of that.
Extremely briefly, just to reassure members, one of the things we've done as a result of a range of issues like that, actually in different bits of transport needing to integrate in the way Daisy described, is set up you might have thought that this existed already, but an officer transport board, which Gareth chairs, which bringing all the different bits of transport together in one place, so that when we're looking at a scheme or looking at a programme or looking whatever it might be, the different bits can align and talk to each other. And obviously the need for that board will be all the more stronger as we move forward with the programme set out in here.
So I think the last report to our committee showed there's 14,000 roadworks in the city per year. It's mind-boggling. Councillor Dublin.
Thank you, Convener. First, just like to reflect upon Daisy's comment earlier that there's a large report, 2 large reports, which I think is very commendable amount of work, but particularly the depth of thought that's gone into them. I found them incredibly interesting and thought-provoking. And indeed, the feeling I've got at the end of them is quite transformative for the city. And it's quite a good time for me to feel transformative, because last week, as my colleagues know at great length, I was in Manchester city centre and was particularly struck by the way in which buses, trams, cyclists, pedestrians all live very happily together with a very small number of cars that are fed through quite carefully. And that, to me, is a fantastic vision for the future. It also seems to me that we shouldn't be too frightened of this, because it seems to me that we have taken some, if you like, baby steps towards this, with the closure of Princes Street, with the closure of Waverley Bridge, which previously I'm sure there were great concerns about, and the inadvertent closure, of course, of the bridges. So first of my 2 quick questions. Is there anything we can learn from that in terms of the concerns about the closure and the impact thereafter? And the second thing is much more kind of down in the detail. I was very struck from the taxi operator presentation earlier about their concerns about the ability to get, in a sense, one sense, parity with the hackney cabs, but also access for certain cohorts of their passengers, people with mobility issues, people who are disabled but don't have to use wheelchairs. And I guess safety in the evenings for children and women passengers having to get to the destination. I'm sure this has been talked a bit about before in committee, but I'm going to suggest before my time, so it'd be useful just to get a summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And again, thank you for your kind words. So I'll pick up the taxi, I see Mr. Woodburn still here, question first, and then the other one about closures, and maybe Gareth can help with the closures one as well. So with the private hire car, as Mr. Woodburn said himself in his deputation, it's very, very complex. There's licensing issues, there's legal issues, there's obviously policy and operational issues. So we are doing a piece of work right now in terms of data. We're hoping to meet with operators in the next few weeks alongside my colleague in licensing, Andrew Mitchell, to understand better the impacts across the trade, not just private hire cars, but hackney cabs as well. There's, as Paul mentioned, there's a place transport group, so this discussion happens there. There's work happening with our legal colleagues. So bringing all of that together, we will come back to committee with a report that with a recommendation on how we move forward. That would be very, very useful, especially for projects like George Street, I think was mentioned earlier this morning. As a project, it cannot deal with these bigger issues around how we deal with taxis in the city. So yes, so we will be coming to committee with a recommendation on that in the spring. It's not, none of it is easy, but we will be coming with a recommendation. Around closures, yes, there have been both closures that have been, so there's two things in my head. There's one that is planned, so events, we're no stranger to events in the city, streets get closed for the festival and many things, and then there's closures that happen, whether it's a gas leak or a Scottish Water, as Councillor Osler mentioned. And I think there's learning across the piece from both. In terms of both intended and unintended consequences, we need to get better at collecting data. If Northbridge, if we had known, would remain closed for this long, perhaps 2 years ago, we would have made sure that there was data collection in place to see where traffic went. I think there is something also about traffic modelling, and I think the report talks about traffic modelling in some sense. And traffic modelling can only tell us so much. And then there's the human behavior and how people either change the time they make trips, they change the kind of trips they make, they change mode. And I think kind of trying to understand when a street is closed, that kind of behavioral change is something that we need to get better at as well. I don't know, Gareth, if you wanted to add.
There's not much I can add, but I think to try and answer your question, Councillor, yeah, the things like the Northbridge is probably a good example. I think if you'd have asked transport officers prior to the Northbridge work starting, can we go down from 4 lanes to 2? The answer would have been absolutely not. In reality, we have done for a significant period of time. And I'm not going to say there's not been impacts, because I'm aware of local businesses, for example, that have had to, we've had to work with hard and certainly have got across their concerns. So there's lessons to learn there about thinking about what would happen in doing this. The Cowgate, Daisy and I and colleagues discussed the Cowgate because obviously we're proposing an experimental order through this, but actually in summertime streets a few years back we closed the Cowgate and we did it on a signed basis. So again, back to the Ghent presentation, the problem we had there is a lot of drivers ignored the signage and it wasn't able to be enforced because we don't have the powers to enforce it and the police colleagues didn't have the resource. So it undermined the aim, but had we the right legislation, would it have worked without the need to physically engineer it? I would argue yes. So yeah, alongside things like when the Virgin Hotel was built, there was a significant impact on the Cowgate. Again, the city, it's easy for me to say the city function. What we need to better understand is what was the impact on business, what was the impact on residents in the city centre, pull that together and then kind of make those tweaks so that we can move these things forward at a bit more pace.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McFarlane. Thanks,
Convener, and thanks, Daisy, Ruth and Phil, for your time. It's certainly, as a twin hat person of City Centre Councillor and Beyond Tech, your time helped me deal with a lot of the imposter syndrome with kind of coming to these really difficult decisions by equipping us with that information. Because the operational aspects are to come, which is where a lot of the anxieties will be coming from the residents I represent, largely leave my questioning for that until we get that plan to come forwards. Although I'd appreciate a reassurance, kind of, you can kind of, in your answer to me, scope out what that's going to look like for them when it does come. So my question, looking more down on the plans regarding the city centre, is how did you come to the boundary of using primarily the LEZ boundary as the boundary for what you refer to as city centre, because the city centre is much bigger than that. And if you ask someone, do you live in the city centre, West Coast, they'll tell you, yeah, they do. So how did you come to that line? And with the presentation we had earlier on from Ghent, where they revisited that kind of inner ring road a couple times and have expanded their pedestrian zone also since they did that plan, how can we be sure that we have the right city centre and we're not going to end up in 10 years' time saying, for goodness sake, we should have always included Lothian Road and Toll Cross in the West End in this. Why didn't we when we first started considering it? And I know the topography is different, rivers, you know, geography, geology of the city. So I'd like you to respond to that if possible, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. And I don't think anyone in this room needs to suffer from imposter syndrome. I think, you know, the guidance that you've given us has helped us to go and do this piece of work. So just from the city centre boundary, so we looked at what this Edinburgh City Centre transformation first set out as a boundary, because that was our starting point to look at ECCT and then go away and see if we could enhance that. So that was the starting point. We did 4 different options, 3 options apart from CCT. So A was CCT and then B, C, D. And each of those we kind of expanded to see where the boundary would be. A lot of that work was, of course, to see, you know, the widths of the roads, the streets that we had. And as you know, we've recommended option C, so discarding one that increased the boundary as well. Phil might have a bit more to say about that in a second. So essentially, it started from the ECCT boundary, which was our starting point for this. In terms of the operations plan, we have already, as part of city centre transformation, we had funding to do to work on the operations plan, and that work had already started. As part of phase 2, post-pandemic, we were looking at phase 2 of ECCT. And if this approach is approved, then we go in and expand that to, you know, to take in more of the area that we've talked about and the different measures we've talked about in addition to ECCT. I think there are 4 themes, and Ruth will keep me straight, in the operations plan. So there's accessibility across the piece, including inclusion, accessibility and inclusion. There is tour buses, coaches and tour buses. There's freight and deliveries and cargo for businesses. And there's one more which is escaping. Yeah. So yeah, sorry, the freight for businesses. So there's different strands that we have, 3 strands, not 4. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what the general scope of it is. And then, of course, there's the detail that sits underneath all of those different strands. Thank you.
Councillor Aston.
Oh, thanks. Can I just check how you're doing this, convener? Are you just going to go, because I've got loads of questions I could ask on this. I could see the disappointment in your eyes when I said I've got loads. Everyone's eyes, for that matter. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much, Daisy, Phil, Ruth, the whole team for these reports. I just want to say something quickly, and that's that, you know, we're not passive participants in getting to a 30% reduction in car kilometres by 2030 or to net zero by 2030. You know, we sit on this committee, we are capable of taking decisions that can get us there. I just thought it was a slightly curious line of questioning, but Councillor Cowdy clearly cares about reaching that 30% reduction and getting to net zero, so I look forward to him back in the workplace parking levy and road user charging when we get to those decisions. But so I actually wanted to ask about the place-based approach to that the reports discuss here. So I understand the logic as it's set out in the reports, and obviously grateful to you and Gareth for giving us a briefing just a couple of days ago on that. But I still feel, you know, given what's in the two reports relating to the place-based approach, I think there are still questions there. So I would have appreciated some more information on basically what is this going to do to the rate of implementation of active travel improvements, what's going to be the impact on the nature of those, you know, the scale and the permanence of them, and you know, what kind of overall is it going to do to the expansion of the active travel network? And I'm just hoping you can address those points.
I'll come in, and Phil might want to come in on this one as well, because to be fair, Phil's done a lot of work. So I think what the idea behind this is to basically maximise the opportunities we can take to make difference. So to use that term, it's kind of the marginal gains, where you have the alignment between, you know, taking Councillor Mowatt's presentation earlier on, there are maintenance issues that we have to manage statutorily. That's our job. But in having this allocation framework, particularly using those opportunities to say, okay, how do we spend once? And this aligns to the street design guidance point that Councillor Bandell's made as well in the past. They're all sensible, and obviously doing this means we can maximise the funding that we have available to us. So if you take the work going on around Portobello High Street, Gorgie Dalry right now, that's about saying there is an aspiration to improve these local high streets. We saw that through COVID particularly. But from a maintenance point of view, our road condition index data tells us they also need investment imminently, and bringing those things together. So instead of that being seen as, you know, being absolutely honest, in the past, active travel's job, it's about us as a transport entity saying, okay, we are all delivering the aims of the city mobility plan. There are statutory aims like maintaining the roads and transport infrastructure. There are policy aims, and if we can bring this together, that place-based investment approach is to say we will have the big schemes like a CC Well or a Meadows to George Street or a George Street, but let's not miss those opportunities. And to be candid, some of the photos that Councillor Mowat showed, regrettably, I think have probably reflected the way we've done it in the past, in constantly delaying for a big project to come, and often replying to members saying, oh, that's on the agenda for, and we're kind of patching things together. We can't afford to do that. So actually that's why we need the big investment plan, but also this place-based approach, because it means we do maximise those opportunities and we keep the network safe.
Just to add a little bit, I think what in particular the street space allocation framework gives us, and the mapping and the citywide integrated network map gives us, is a context for each project, so that when we're doing, there's some money to do an active travel project on a particular street, or a public transport project on a street, or a renewals project on a street, then we've got a framework that says this is our aspiration for the street, and we can see what we can do as part of the project. I don't think it doesn't mean that every time we have a project on a particular bit of street, we completely reconstruct it. It means that we do look at what the framework says, and in cases like we've started doing this in Portobello and Dalry are good examples where we had a renewals project. We've looked at the streets. We've seen that there is actually a real need and opportunity to transform that street, and so we've taken that out of the renewals programme essentially, and built the projects around that. But that wouldn't happen in every single case. So I don't think this is a case where you have to be worried that every single piece of street is then going to get completely reconstructed, because obviously we'd never get anywhere. But it does give us a framework which hopefully gives us a consistent approach for every project that we're taking forward.
Thank you, Councillor Aston. Councillor Brandon?
Thank you very much. And first of all, as all the other people have already said, huge congratulations to you and your team for completing these two massive pieces of work. And I really hope you get some well-deserved rest after today. My question is on how the city mobility plan and its principles now disseminate, and how that filters through to all the different work streams we have as part of the service area. How do we make sure that all of these different reports that come to this committee reflect the city mobility plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and again, thank you for your kind words to the team. They're all watching on Teams, so I'm sure they're all very pleased. Thank you. In terms of how it's disseminated, I think that is an absolutely fair and valid point. That is the whole point of having, I think the work that has been done in creating these reports has laid a real strong foundation, because the work needed to kind of come together and bring this integrated CMP-led implementation plan has already meant that we've had a stronger kind of interdepartment working. Paul mentioned the place transport group, which is, you know, more senior level. We can grapple with some difficult issues as well, but not just transport, we're working closer with, for example, the climate team, you know, the Blue-Green Network. So Julie Waldron and team, we're working closer with Joan Power and Cultures team to see, you know, if you take traffic away from the streets, what goes and are there opportunities there to maximize what we want to do through arts and culture, working better with Elon's team in terms of, you know, getting better learning lessons from previous projects, getting better at business engagement, and, you know, there's a piece of work that we're doing with her around a toolkit for businesses. So, you know, hopefully what we're trying to do through this place-based approach goes beyond transport and place as well. Of course, planning, sorry, I should mention planning and heritage as well. So again, this is an opportunity because we have the transport bits in one place now. It's one implementation plan that allows us to disseminate that wider within the council as well. I don't know if, Paul, you wanted to say anything?
No, I was only going to say, sorry, we've opened the window to get a bit of fresh air. If members find it too noisy, then please say so and I'll close it again. It wasn't for a soundtrack, believe me.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. It was really nice to see people ask proactively for street trees and greenery and things like that in the consultation. So can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Thank you, Councillor. So the street space allocation framework, you know, it looks at what street space we have, and then kind of, it doesn't go into the detail of trees or where trees are placed, or as we talked about, didn't we, where, you know, where there is parking removed, that could have, you know, cycle hangers, trees, suds. There's a whole variety of things that space, it gets freed up to do. What it does allow us to do is strengthen the link between the street design guidance, which has a fact sheet on street trees as well, and it allows teams who are delivering projects on the ground, it provides them with the starting point of where they have space to provide trees. Again, as I said, working closely with Julie and team, we'll work better at, you know, really embedding nature and biodiversity where we can into the streetscape.
Councillor Vachenda, it's reached you at last.
And I do still have questions, even after all those. One other thing, I mean, there was a huge amount of reading, obviously, around both of these reports, and a lot of that were other plans that we have already produced. I mean, I think I counted something like 11, I think, of those which were sort of strategic plans. And I think that at that point we do have to understand and to recognise that citizens feel that these reports and aspirations are taking up a lot of the time and a lot of your time, more of your time actually, in doing that. And what I was interested in how you feel about how much this strategic work and the priority that it's given impacts on dealing with the issues like the ones that Councillor Mowat highlighted to us, or, and I think that Gareth might have answered this in some ways as well, it actually is part of the solution to those as well. So that was my first question. And I'll ask the second one, because I think it'll maybe link into it. It was really about the options for non-permanent roadblocks, because although placemaking is nice, I feel that to have the flexibility to deal with crises, and what's making me think about that a wee bit is what's happening on Lindsay Road right now with the close, is that when we're closing road, that we leave ourselves, in the case of an emergency, in a serious emergency, that we can open that road if there's no other option for the traffic as to where it should go. So what are your feelings about that, the sort of non-permanent stuff?
I was going to say briefly, Councillor, I very much take the point about, shall we say, more permeable infrastructure. So members will obviously in the use of planters, that kind of things, which hopefully A, has got some greenery in it, B, is movable, so therefore can be moved in the kind of circumstances you talk about, and bring something to the street. So I think the point about accessibility when needed, but filtering out what isn't desired is absolutely right, and we can achieve that. I just wanted to say something, I suppose, about Councillor Mowatt's slides, which, and we've discussed this as officers certainly well before we saw that today, which is obviously all over the city, there are examples of streetscape which are of an unacceptable standard. But certainly, as Councillor Mowat rightly said, Princes Street is completely unacceptable in terms of trip hazards, in terms of quality of the public realm and so on. Indeed, Gareth and I were just talking about it the other day in terms of city centre infrastructure, which may, I know it's been spent 3 times over, which may in due course be a candidate for the kind of investment which a visitor levy would generate. So if we were to generate a capital pot from the visitor levy, what would be the priority in Princes Street? We had a long discussion about Ruth and colleagues have already done some work on designs for Princes Street and improvements which are at the marginal end and at the transformational end, depending on what kind of money we've got to play with. So just to reassure committee that, and to your point, Councillor, really your question, I don't think it is either or. Officers are well aware that those works need to be done, and this report and hopefully some additional resources, which either might come through the council's budget process or through other means like the visitor levy, will give us the requirements to do it. But we are well aware of that need.
Councillor
Point of order, convener, if I may.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
22.9. Sorry, it's taken me so long. I've been looking up to find the point. Councillor Aston mentioned my name in respect of net zero. I think there's been a misrepresentation there. I'm worried that he or the committee might be under a misapprehension. I wonder if I could clear the record.
That would be me, so I'm happy to be corrected.
And if I could just correct.
Please make your point.
So the point is, irrespective of what my position is regarding whether or not I would like to reach net zero or a reduction in the kilometres, my point is that this city mobility plan is based on the fact that we are aiming to try and get there by 2030. And that's the point I just wanted to clarify. It is no reflection on whether or not I want it. Mm-hmm. It's about that I don't believe it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, convener. Daisy, one of the central objectives of the City Mobility Plan is to promote increased cycling and active travel. And that, you've got on your report, is by increasing the perception of safety while cycling in the city. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor Munro.
Okay. So in section 4, paragraph 5, point 4 of the report, or that in KPIs 4 and 27 of Appendix 1, it is clearly demonstrated that an increase in the perception of safety of cycling in the city does not necessarily produce an increase in uptake of cycling opportunities. So this raises the alarming possibility of a flaw in the planned strategy. So could officers please explain, or yourself, any evidence that you may have based on results rather than responses to consultations indicating a clear link between improved safety for cyclists and increased cycling uptake? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. So the data that we collect for cycling comes from the Walking and Cycling Index, which collects data, both behavioural data, so what people want to see, and how they perceive cycling and the safety, and not just safety, but also the joy that they get from cycling. People who who feel like that cycling is a mobility aid. So there's various different kinds of cycling opportunities. Safety is one aspect of it. People feel like if there is safe infrastructure, that they would feel that they would cycle more. We use the walking and cycling index. I'm happy to share data that comes from that. There'll be data in those documents that might help answer some of your evidence questions, if that's okay.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Daisy. So you do actually have evidence, which is great, based on the results that, rather than responses to consultations, which indicate that clear link between improved safety for cyclists and increased cycling uptake. So I look forward to receiving those. Thank you very much, Daisy.
So, Councillor Munro, I think also Peter's presentation before lunchtime actually drew the connection between improving the situation for cyclists and uptake. But particularly if you look at over the longer term from 1997 through to now. I've got a copy of the slides, I'll share them.
I have, but when you go into the depths, and I've literally gone through it with a fine tooth comb, if you were to actually read it in all the appendices that I've actually put in, you will see that it does raise a possibility that there's a flaw in the plan because there is no actual evidence based on results, and that's actually in there. It's rather that it's just responses and consultations. So that's all that I was bringing up, and that's obviously wonderful that Daisy's going to help with that, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to sweep right to left again. Don't feel obliged to ask a question when I get you. Please don't. Councillor Cowdery.
Yep, thank you very much. I do feel obliged to ask a question. Also, active travel as well. And I'd actually like to recognise something as well, Daisy. You had said earlier that you kind of feed off of comments that we make to you and you try and change the plan. So I acknowledge that, and in particular, I would like to say that I did notice Active Travel Action Plan, page 33, a review of maintenance of existing cycle lanes has been put in there, and Mr. Barwell will know that is something that I have kind of raised, and I think I said at the last tech, I'm going to keep asking that question until I get an answer. So I appreciate it's in there. Obviously, it doesn't actually say that what is going to be done, but I recognise it's been mentioned. Anyway, my question really is about cycle lanes. Page 23 says that junctions are the most dangerous. So my kind of question is, why does it seem that so much resource and focus is put into cycle lanes on sort of straight roads, and it seems that the result of what's written in the report kind of says junctions are most dangerous, but it's actually very difficult to solve that problem, so actually we're not really going to do much about it. So and I'm just trying to get my head around, if it's the most dangerous, surely, if anything, we should be putting everything into the junctions and sort of leaving to a minimus the rest of the cycle lane infrastructure. Because as I've said before, sorry, I know you're going to hit the button. As I've said before, I am also aware and worried that we have just got such an enormous plan for a cycle lane network that's going to cost us hundreds of millions of pounds, which we don't have, when in fact the focus ought to be on the most dangerous parts.
Thank you, Councillor Cowdery. It's again, an excellent question. So essentially for cycling, and this is, all literature says that, experience says that any network is as weak as its weakest link, is only as strong as its weakest link. And as we know, it's the junctions where people feel most unsafe, especially if it's a busy junction with a lot of traffic. One of the reasons why we set out to do the major junctions review a few years ago was, exactly that point, was to ensure that you can build in between junctions, and then what happens at the junctions is that's where the weak link is in a network, and then people don't choose to cycle anymore. So I don't think it's an either or. I think to build a whole network, we need to make sure that every part of the link is built. There'll be some junctions which are more expensive and more difficult to build, and that's where the major junctions review is a huge part of the city mobility plan. And then, as Paul was saying, cycle lanes can be built like CCWell, with lots and lots of money and civil engineering costs, or they could be, we could use, materials like we've used in Holyrood Road, which is less expensive. So for me, the focus is about moving away from cycle lanes to building a cycle network, and that includes really focusing on the pinch points and the weak links in that network.
Sorry, Convener, just to add, So I think that's a very fair question, Councillor. I think what this plan, this update allows us to do is, in taking that, if you take that corridor-based approach, so to Councillor Aston's point earlier, that place-based approach is about taking the little opportunities. If you think of what's come through this committee previously, the major junctions review principally was around pedestrian and cyclist safety. That's what we looked at. Alongside that, of course, we're now seeing proposals around bus priority that are also citing junctions as pinch points. So what this allows us to do is to say, okay, we've obviously got to prioritise safety. Dave Sinclair's on the call. We have a road safety plan that I think would be that will be one of the iterative documents that comes back every year because the nature of our network changes and we need to respond to that. To Councillor Fajenda's point, I would like to think that we get to a point now where the strategy is in place and we are coming with delivery plans and investment plans. And ideally, I think the challenge to us as officers, councillors today have asked, where is public transport investment? What about park and rides? What about active travel? We need to go away and say to committee, with the funding we have right now, this is what we believe is the best investment plan to deliver the aims of the city mobility plan. And to be absolutely honest, that might mean we have to recommend to you that some of our previous commitments don't necessarily meet that aim. Now, I'm not saying that's because that is the case, but I think if we're going to do this job properly, that's the level of scrutiny we need to give it as officers, and then understandably you will want to give us. So I think it is a step change. It's a great piece of work, this, and it does just focus your mind on thinking we are trying to make multimodal investments that deliver the aims of the city mobility plan. On occasions, they will be mode-specific investments, but ideally, to make the money go further, we want to be investing in those interventions that deliver most for the key modes we are trying to prioritise.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dexter Downey.
Thank you, Convener. I have a question about the Roseburn Path. In your overlaying network map, the section of the Telford-Roseburn Path that we'll be discussing later on is designated as a secondary cycle route. Can I just be really clear that I've understood this correctly? The reason why it is secondary is because of the potential conflict with the proposed tram route, rather than because it is either less important or less well used than some of the other parts of the same network that are designated as primary cycle route. Have I got that right?
Thank you, Councillor. And I've been following the public discourse over this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion in the next item. I just wanted to clarify, because I think I've seen that it feels that there's a contradiction when actually probably we should have clarified that a bit more. So yes, it is a secondary network because of the potential for the tram route to go there. We have not said we will ban cycling on that route. What we've said is it will no longer be a route that is a strategic key cycling route, because the experience of cycling along that route would be very, very different alongside a tram. So the key strategic route, as we have proposed and as will be debated in the next report, we have said will be on road, and we've said that the 3 meters at the moment will not provide the same experience of safe, the cycling experience that you have right now. So that's why it's a secondary route. It's probably worth saying, and Phil has corrected me on this a couple of days ago as well, when we were talking about it, it was shown as secondary when we brought the draft report to yourselves, but that was for a different reason, because at that point the trams were not there. That was for the fact that it was an off-road path, and at that point we were saying on-road was part of the network.
Councillor Osler.
Thank you very much, Kavina. My question is obviously about Lothian Road, where we all know about the spectre of Piccadilly Place. And I suppose a lot of concern from the other side of town is we're going to create the similar sort of conflict and the endless issues that we've had. What assurance can we give individuals we've learnt? And I'm not talking about it's because of the tram, I'm talking about how and why it was developed. And it was developed on a particular way that doesn't necessarily fit the way that we've taken it forward. My concern, and I think concerns of residents on the other side of the city centre, is how do we learn from what happened on one side and don't create the same sort of conflict issues and problems on the other side?
Can I just maybe start on that briefly, Convener? I'm sure Daisy will come in. I suppose the experience of what happened at Piccadilly is almost, if you like, a reason why this report is in front of you. Because at that time we were looking at the design of Piccadilly as a one-off, as one part of the city. And what this is trying to do is look at the network as a whole. And Daisy, Phil, Ruth and their teams have done that in detail. And we said at the time around Piccadilly, which needed to be done because of the St James work, because of the tram works and the rest of it, look, we're trying to find a way of designing this now, but it's really hard to do so because actually we need to think about the network as a whole. So this report, for example, raises the prospect of potentially the Bridges corridor being public transport only in due course. Well, if that was the case, it would have a significant impact on Piccadilly. So these things are linked. And so that's the background to kind of seeing the network as a whole, not just... Previously, there was conversations about the design of Lothian Road, as Lothian Road. The report in front of you is trying to look at the network as a whole and points that, for example, Councillor Mowat and others have raised previously around displacement, and to try and deal with those in the round. So that was the attempt behind this report, to make sure we didn't do that again. I think in that circumstance, we still, did what we did. The convener, I think, has said previously that was a mistake of the past. I was obviously quite heavily involved, and I'm not sure we could have done anything else given we were at the time. But we now do a trying through this report to see that as a network, and, Lothian Road will need to be managed in that way.
Thank you, Paul. And just very quickly to add to that, and Lothian Road is an excellent example, Councillor Osler, exactly as you said. So, as Paul was saying, we've looked at Lothian Road as a Lothian Road Boulevard project. And now that we've looked at the citywide network, we've seen that actually, if we want the wider benefits to both the city centre and beyond, there are streets like Lothian Road and Queen Street, for example, which will have to take on some more general traffic. So we're having to now go back and revisit what the Lothian Road project will now look like, because the framework around that has changed. And so when the project comes back to yourselves as a Lothian Road project, it has the wider kind of displacement and mitigations and all of that will be put into place when that comes to yourselves. So, for example, we know the worst case scenario has been put in front of yourselves in terms of impact on buses and traffic. And then, so when the Lothian Road project looks at that corridor, to look at, okay, we talked about trees, space for trees, do we have that anymore? We talked about parking, do we have that anymore? Where can we put in, if there's more traffic, you want safer cycling, so we put in cycle lanes. You want buses to be able to beat the congestion. Where is best to place that? So it just gives a different frame to Lothian Road, which I think the circulation plan will help, as Paul was saying, avoid some of the issues that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and Lothian Road's a reminder as well that we can't do any of this without compromise. There's no solution that doesn't involve compromise. Piccadilly Place, is designed as a three-way junction, but if we change the city centre as proposed, it'll be a two-and-a-half-way junction. Perhaps we can go back to the design that Daisy had when she worked for Sustrans. I think it's maybe still in a drawer somewhere. Which we rejected. Which Paul rejected, he said.
Elected members.
Councillor Dublin, do you have another question? Councillor McFarlane? Councillor Aston?
I'm here to disappoint you. Okay, so I can ask two questions. Okay, thanks. Councillor Dobbin says I can have one of his. So I'm just trying to think what order to ask these in. Okay, so I get that bringing forward measures looking at North Bridge, South Bridge, Nicholson Street is going to be significantly more complicated than the report's proposal to just really look at the Cowgate and Guthrie Street, Nidri Street, etc. Because obviously the importance of the Bridges corridor to public transport, and basically there's more of everything moves along it at the moment, and there are far more connections to other places as you go along as well. But it seems to me that the same thing that has sparked the recognition that quick action needs to be taken for the Cowgate is, you know, they're present on the bridges, if anything, even more so than is the case in the Cowgate. So I'm just wondering, I guess, like, why was that not followed through on in the original report, and, you know, anything else you want to say about it? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Aston. So essentially the Cowgate, because as Gareth was saying earlier, you know, has been trialled as part of Summer Streets. We've got some information about that. We know, you know, a little bit more about what the potential impacts of that closure and how to mitigate those. So it was felt that within this year, it was something that was easier to deliver, perhaps. With North Bridge, I think it comes back, you know, you're right, South Bridge has similar issues. The pavements, Paul never tires of saying to me how the pavements just don't, it doesn't work for anybody at the moment. So, you know, whether that, it comes back to the question around how you want to implement this. Is it as a whole, or is it implemented, you know, bit by bit? City centre transformation, when it was approved in 2019, had a 10-year delivery plan, so it was very much an incremental change and, you know, change and review. So I suppose it's for members to kind of set out to us how you want us to go away and kind of approach that. So I know that there's been discussion about potentially loan market being part of a trial this year, and, you know, bridges, I know that there's a debate to be had there.
Thanks. I mean, that actually, I'm glad I asked it in this order, because it segues quite well onto my next question, which is, so my understanding is that your current feeling is maybe more of a Birmingham-style phased zonal introduction. But of course, you know, we heard from Peter from Ghent earlier, the way they did it, you know, in kind of one swoop, delivered a 37% reduction in car usage in a very short period of time, and that's, you know, given what we've heard today, that car use is, you know, almost back to pre-pandemic levels and could exceed that, you know, that's the kind of radical step change that we probably need if we're going to reach that 30% reduction within the next 6 years now. So I guess I know this is a decision for another day, because you know, the operations plan is going to come later if this report is approved, as, you know, it probably is going to be, let's be honest. But some, you know, you've clearly given some thought already to it, so just wondering if you could speak about that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we have. We've looked at, you know, there is the, on one end of the spectrum is, as I mentioned, City Centre Transformation, which is a 10-year plan, and then the Big Bang approach. It's worth probably saying that even the overnight or over a weekend change that City of Ghent has implemented came before that was 2.5 years of development work and all the communication operations. So, you know, if we were to adopt that approach, we would still need that, you know, real lead-in time to do that. Similar to, I suppose, what we're doing with the LEZ. You know, the LEZ, in effect, is that you know, you wake up one morning and the regulation will have changed. So, but all the work is taken to bring us to this point. I think, for me, there is work to be done. I think, I can't remember, about the unintended consequences as well. So there's a little bit more work to be done, especially around the bridges, to look at traffic displacement, to look at some of the consequences for businesses, a bit more work to be done in terms of modeling what that would look like. You know, if we had this similar level of information that we have around Cowgate, for example, that would, to get to that level would be good before we can do that.
Just to add, I think in many ways, Councillor, the answer to your question probably comes in what we're searching for in 1.1.3 of the report, which is to bring back, subsequent to this, the implementation plan, because I think it's fair to say probably exercise a bit of a view as officers in not coming forward with a recommendation of a big bang or street by street, the zonal discussion that's happened in briefings is because I think it's our belief that you can't do this street by street. You know, demand doesn't change on a street by street basis, and the displacement risk is heightened because people in, for example, cars will come in and will seek the next nearest place to park. So therefore, we'd certainly, prior to this, had thought about a more zonal introduction. I'm mindful of the comments that Peter made in his presentation. There's something we need to take away as officers and learn from that and say, actually, before we come back to members with a recommendation, what are the associated risks and benefits with those different implementations? Straight off the top of my head, the Cowgate is obviously generally, from a point in time, one street. There's a few connecting roads that will take you up to the Royal Mile section. If you take the Bridges corridor, we have to model then the displacement to the kind of spurs that come off that and the interplay with Old Darkeith Road and Causeway Side. So there's a bit more complexity, but I think that's a challenge for us to go away as officers and say if that's the will of members, then we need to be able to do that. And a point Phil made earlier on, that we often talk about modelling, but if you don't change demand in your modelling assumptions and you plumb in the same number of vehicle movements, the model has to send those vehicles somewhere. And that's why the demand management piece is critical in this, because we have to offer some different alternative. Otherwise, that is why models will always come up with the fact that the vehicles have to go somewhere, because you've got to put in some kind of assumption of what design you're putting in there to change that demand.
Right. Councillor Bandel, do you have a further question?
I do, thank you very much. I have a question on the Edinburgh City Centre transformation. The update means that traffic flows will change and some roads like Lothian Road might receive more traffic. What can we put in place in terms of mitigation to ensure road safety?
Thank you, Councillor Bandal. So yes, for example, if you're on a bike and if there's additional traffic on the road, you will feel extraordinarily unsafe. And so one mitigation for people on bikes would be to provide safe, separated infrastructure, which of course takes up space. So, what is the trade-off then? For buses, the impact on buses, it's less so safety, it's more on journey times. So there is that impact to be mitigated in terms of journey times. For people on foot, Lothian Road, it's about, the pavements are quite wide, but it's about making it more pleasant for them to enjoy the experience of Lothian Road, which is not a traffic corridor. It has moved. Edinburgh City Centre transformation talked about Lothian Road as a place, whereas with the circulation plan, that changes to being about movement. But within that movement framework, you still have opportunities to create good places. So outside the Usher Hall, for example, we still have an opportunity to do something special there, which addresses not just safety, but also for it to be a pleasant experience to be on the street. So so there are different ways of that kind of mitigation. I hope that answers your question. Of course, there are junctions as well, Toll Cross Junction, West End. Sorry, and that'll be, of course, again, this will, the additional traffic will have to factor into how those junctions are dealt with as well. And I think the timing is right for this report just now, because Lothian Road project is soon to go out to consultation, and I think with this kind of umbrella that sits over it, the consultation becomes more meaningful in terms of what we can do.
Okay, Councillor Neil.
Just one technical question. It's in reference to the first appendix of the City Mobility Plan. It says KPIs show an increase from 33% of households who had access to a bike in 2019 to 48% in 2021. This is obviously hopeful that that's going up, but do you think this was just a blip, maybe because everyone was doing it during COVID, or do you think that this is a good thing coming out of the bike hire scheme, something we want to look at ahead?
Sorry, Councillor O'Neill, which KPI number is that?
Appendix 1 starts...
KPI 9, is it? The increased level of household access to a bike. Apologies, I've lost the question since I was looking for
it. No, that's all right.
Sorry.
Just the difference, it's went from 33 to 48% from 2019 to 2021. Do you think that's just a COVID stat, or are you hopeful that that will increase, and how do you see that going forward, do you think, if you can say? Thanks.
Yeah, hopeful that it's a trend rather than just an anomaly. likewise with all, I suppose, the information we're getting through the data. This was taken from the Scottish Household Survey, so I think there's a relative level of confidence in the data, but obviously we'd need to keep monitoring that, and that's I suppose the beauty of having maybe what might be considered quite a wide, broad range of KPIs now in the new CMP. I think we've added another 21, which maybe seems like quite a lot, but I think the nature of the objectives we're trying to seek to understand the performance against, they're quite quite a lot of aspects to the objectives, which means that these different KPI indicators are helping shape our understanding. So if that then comes back in a couple of years' time with a slightly strangely lower figure, I think we perhaps might see that it's an anomaly, but it's quite difficult to tell at the moment, I think.
It's probably worth just very quickly to add that there is funding provided by Scottish Government now specifically for access to bikes, and I think that's something that, you know, as a council we'll be applying for.
Sorry, Councillor Fachenda.
Yeah, just one. I mean, I think that from what we heard about Ghent, it proves one of my things, which is that every city is unique, and I think we have to talk more about our unique solutions for our unique city as well. And one of the things that I've been thinking a bit about is pedestrians as well, which is obviously part of this, and the big issues that we have, especially during the festival season, where however wide the pavement, it'll actually never be wide enough sometime in some parts of the city. And obviously, and maybe it does fall a little bit into operational, but I think that we've got to acknowledge these things to bring people with us on this, to say we do recognise these problems. And again, going back to the whole, you know, the solutions for tourism, if we're going to be discouraging the circulation of motor coaches within the central area of town, obviously that is going to increase the amount of footfall of groups moving around, which already can be problematic in the city. So you know, I think we do have to acknowledge that these are issues, these are part of the issues that we'll be dealing with, is also about how people move, groups of people within the city centre as well. Because for me, sometimes, as somebody who walks around a lot, it's almost a worse problem than the traffic sometimes, is you can't walk down the streets and you end up in the middle of the road.
Thank you, Councillor. That's an absolutely fair point. And I think, you know, again, making sure that walking improvements is very much at the heart of ATAP. I think the Act Travel Action Plan and now which is in the implementation plan, have specific walking actions that, you know, speak to what you've just mentioned. It's probably worth saying as well that I know we've not talked about the neighbourhood strand of the circulation plan, and I think the city centre is a neighbourhood. People live there, and obviously it's a special kind of place. But it's the neighbourhood strand is very much about walking and walking improvements, so better crossings, drop curbs, tightening of radii, that kind of thing.
So we are 90 minutes in, and Councillor Ursula in particular is looking quite tired. So I was hoping we can go formal, but if people still have a zinger of a question, and it has to be a real zinger, that's okay. Councillor Munro first.
Thank you. It's very short and sharp. So looking at all of this, it's inevitable. Edinburgh's going to lose a lot of money revenue-wise, and we've spoken about this before due to obviously lack of parking, and where, you know, we have made a lot of money on that, increase in parking charges, residents potentially, maybe parking permits going up. We're going to have to get that money from somewhere. Are we possibly looking at charging residents to drive on certain roads across the city? Because that has been mentioned in the media. So it's just, so if anybody's watching now, they know that at some point in the future, there may be charging for moving around our city if they're a resident.
So I'll answer that, because I do think perhaps wasn't clear enough in the media brief when we were speaking about this. So I'm very excited about the Bus Partnership Fund project, you know, in terms of encouraging people to use public transport from surrounding local authorities. And I think, you know, as we talked about, it's disappointing that's been paused. So how I've seen this unfolding over the next few years is we invest quite heavily in the Bus Partnership Fund, adding bus capacity, reliability, reducing journey times. Honestly, I find it's really exciting and really important, and the cost benefits are fantastic. But the reality is that that's the carrot, putting in that excellent bus service for people from surrounding local authorities. But if they didn't engage in that, I think in the plan there's talk of a congestion charge to encourage people from the surrounding local authorities, rather than driving in, using this fantastic bus service that we're delivering via the Bus Partnership Fund. Now, it is the reality that along the same timeline, both the UK and the Scottish Government will be thinking about pay-as-you-drive, particularly the UK Government, because the UK Government has to find a way of replacing the fuel duty. Because as we buy less petrol and diesel, we're going to be buying more electricity. So either they're going to charge us for using that electricity at home to fuel our electric vehicles, fuel charge, or they'll look at road pricing. And I think both the Scottish and UK governments are looking at that as an alternative to fuel duty. And the reality is, you already pay as you drive, because you buy petrol or diesel and you use it as you go along, and quite a large element of that is tax. So that's all that I was really speaking about, nothing more complex than that.
No, that's super. So what you are saying is that potentially if you live outside the area, there will be a congestion charge coming in. And if you do live in the city centre, or you live in the out areas like Ward 10, where my residents are, that are going to get the bulk of the traffic coming in because of all these measures that are taking place, then they could potentially be charged.
Well, you layer potentially quite a lot, and I think it would be a decision of this committee. It wouldn't be a decision of me, it's a decision of myself. But for even for us to think about this, it involves the UK and the Scottish Government working together, and that doesn't always happen that well.
No, it doesn't. But when you're knocking on the doors in Balcarres Street or Brunsfield Place, they don't ask me about the Scottish and UK Government. They ask me about whether or not they're going to get their road fixed, their pavement fixed, and am I going to be charged for my permit? Is it going to be more? Is there going to be parking charges to drive around my area? That's what they're asking me, convener. So thank you for just clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Paul, do you want to say something?
I was only going to say, Councillor, just I suppose from the officer side, there's clearly a political debate to be had. There's only one proposal at the moment that we are consulting on, as you know, and that's the workplace parking levy, which the Scottish Government has passed laws to make that. So obviously, you know, that consultation is ongoing just now, and the results of that will be brought back to committee. The only other powers we have at the moment, kind of things members have discussed about control parking zones, extending those kind of areas. I think Councillor Osler asked about that. So those are the only things from an officer's side. Those are the kind of tools in the box at the moment. What the governments might do, either separately or between them, is obviously a matter down the line.
Thank you. Much more diplomatic than I am. Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much, convener. And it is really with regard private vehicle hire. We've heard not just at this committee, but at previous committees, constant deputations coming in from the PVH sector airing their concerns. What engagement is there between council officers and PVH about trying to mitigate the issues that they have raised?
I might leave Daisy to talk about the engagement council, but just to confirm what Daisy said, is our intention is to bring back a report specifically on this issue for members to consider, so that we can finally address the issues that were raised in the deputation and come forward with a clear policy. I don't want to say it will be in X cycles, because we're working on it and members will be fully aware of the workload of the committee, but we are intending to bring that report over coming months. Daisy and her team and others are in dialogue, I think, with the sector. You might want to just detail that, Daisy.
Thank you, Paul. So yes, so we've, Mr. Woodburn's smiling. So, you know, we've met a few times. We've met Uber as well, and you know, happy to speak. But we've met private hire car companies with the lens of projects, specific projects. For example, George Street and Meadows to George Street are two examples. But of course, the conversation is wider than projects. It's, you know, it's as we've discussed just now, and which is why I think bringing back a report to address those wider issues will help with project discussions. So, you know, there's not deputations then for project by project issues.
And I'm also mindful that it was the private hire cab industry that came in to speak to us this morning with 3 deputations, and you know, they all made similar points about how they see things and how they think the council should respond to that. It wasn't disability groups that were coming in, or disability campaign groups, to talk about these issues. And as part of things like the George Street, there's been a lot of depth, you know, both breadth and depth of conversation with campaigning disability organisations about what that would mean in terms of additional vehicles coming into the area. So we have to get the balance right and respect everyone's rights. Right, so if we're over with questions, Thankfully, yeah, okay. I have to say, we're already, I'm getting worried about 5 o'clock, particularly as I know Councillor Osler wants to make a sharp exit. So, again, I want to... yeah. So, so again, I want to thank Daisy and her team for these reports, and also the committee for both the questions today and all the input they've had into them. You know, both during this administration and the previous committee, how they developed it, and probably the administration before that as well for some of the actions we're looking at. So with Transport in Edinburgh, it is tempting just to do nothing and focus on just getting what we've got already working better, you know, and perhaps fill a few potholes along the way. But you can see what's happening. You can see what Ghent's managed to do in the time, you know, since I've been elected, more or less. They've transformed their city centre. And Daisy last week, she showed me a flyer from Edinburgh, dated 1989, talking about the need to deal with congestion in the city centre. Since then, Nottingham's built a whole tram network, and we've got one tram line. So I do think we've got a lot of catching up to do, and what's in this report, I hope it gets us in the right direction. So as it's been outlined already, it's about tackling congestion, hitting these net zero, and also accommodating the quite extensive growth we're expecting in the city and the surrounding local authorities, which is only going to put more pressure on our city and the city centre. Councillor Cowdy, in terms of targets, these are targets. So I think the correct word is ambitions around the 30% vehicle use in net zero. They're not going to be easy to meet. When this administration first formed, I think was it Paula McClay. She was very direct with me. These are going to be really challenging, and if you look at net zero, the drying up of the money for retrofit of council properties and council houses makes that really, really difficult. And that's before we even look at transport. But I think it's good that we have a target that we really have to stretch to meet, rather than one that's easy to meet. And going back to the Bus Partnership Fund, I don't see how Scotland can reduce vehicle kilometres by 20% without that. And it's going to be really difficult in Edinburgh as well. So let's hope that money finds its way in this budget, actually, and isn't paused. But I welcome what's in the report. The place-based approach is excellent. Hopefully that should deliver better for communities with less disruption. And we've got actions raising from regional bus networks through to trialling 777 bus lanes, which I think Councillor Bandel will be talking about in a second, connections with the southern sub. So those are all that big stuff, but also getting the basics right, like extending footpaths, hopefully in places like Morningside, which was touched on earlier, installing more bike racks, hopefully not on footpaths, and also, basic things like putting benches on streets for people to have a wee seat, and also making sure that the route to school is safe for kids to walk. It's shameful that so many kids in Edinburgh, their parents feel it's not safe enough to walk to school. And I know that's something that we've talked about often on this committee, occasionally raised by Councillor Dykstra-Downey, and it's something I think I'm disappointed that we've not been able to accelerate that further, because I do know that everybody shares that ambition here. So I think there's something in this report for everybody to like. Everybody in Edinburgh, I think there'll be things in this report they can get behind. There'll be others that perhaps they're more concerned about, but I think the question is, going back to that congestion, net zero and accommodating growth, if this isn't the plan to do that and create that better city for us to live in and work in, what is the alternative? And that was the question I put to Councillor Mowat earlier today, and it's not clear to me that there is alternative really. So I think this is the plan. There's no plan B, and again, I'm grateful for Daisy and her team for bringing this forward for us to discuss today. So I'm happy to move this, Councillor Facenda.
In the interest of time, I'll just second that formally.
Is that you politely saying I was talking for too long there? So I think I've got Councillor Dykstra-Downey now.
Thank you, Convener. And just to be clear, is this me moving my amendment on 7.1, not 7.2?
Oh, yeah, we're on 7.1.
Yes, fine. Yeah, good. Thank you very much. I'll keep this really brief. So this is the first major review of the City Mobility Plan, the first time we've really been able to scrutinise the report on progress against targets. But the review also, to us, demonstrates that it is really difficult to interpret the success of measures where KPIs simply say increase or reduce. Because without measurable targets, it's difficult to assess whether, for example, a 1% increase in resident cycling or walking is something to celebrate or, in fact, an inadequate result. So what we're asking for in this amendment is another look at how we report on these KPIs by making them concrete and measurable, because else it would be incredibly difficult to measure over time whether or not we are on track with any of these or whether these have ultimately been successful. Thank you.
Formally.
Okay, and I hope people will reflect on Councillor Dyson-Downey's request. I think you've had my note. I think this was discussed previously. We decided not to do it this way, but I think there is a genuine discussion to be had. So I'll look forward to people's contributions on that. Councillor Bandel.
Thank you, Convener, and again, a massive thank you to everyone who has worked on reviewing and updating this plan over the probably more than the past year or so. It's really great to see the City Mobility Plan come back in all its glory and in all its detail, and I do mean this unironically because I genuinely had a really good time reading this report and its 12 beautiful appendices. This plan shows that we know what needs to be done, we just need to do it. And that means that for this plan to be successful, we all need to get on board with its principles and push in the same direction. Firstly, our addendum wants to make sure that everybody in the transport service area knows exactly what we are working towards and which principles should guide our work. There are many strands of work within transport and a lot of people working on them, and it will be the sum of all these different strategies and projects and plans and delivery programs that will determine if we meet the targets we set out in the City Mobility Plan, which I can tell my Conservative colleagues are achievable if there is political support for them and they are not constantly sabotaged. And my experience of this committee has been that it's fairly easy for parties to support something like active travel, for example, in principle, but we are going to need that support consistently when it comes down to the difficult nitty-gritty of actually delivering bus gates and cycle lanes and quiet routes and so forth. Because it is really important that we deliver the City Mobility Plan. This committee didn't put this plan together and set a deadline for 2030 because we really enjoy a challenge. We are doing this because we want Edinburgh to be more equal, accessible, and a livable city, and because the climate emergency is very real and transport emissions are one of the biggest contributors to it. 2030 is only 6 years from now on, so we really need everyone to get their act together. On a much more specific note, the report mentioned the possibility of implementing a 777 that's enough sevens, bus lane trial. So our addendum formally requests that we start working on that. As you can see in the appendix, bus lanes are one of the lower cost options we can use to really make a difference to bus journey times and reliability. And operators have been asking this for a long time. Councillors have been asking for it for a long time. So just let's go and do it. Thank you.
What they said, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Munro.
Sorry, I'm at a loss. What are we doing this so much? Oh, yes. My motion. Thank you very much. 7.1. Am I doing 7.1? Yes. Sorry, long day. Vote. So the reason that we've put this motion together is basically because we don't think the residents, to be perfectly honest, really understand what is going to be happening to their city. And we as a group feel uncomfortable with that. We're concerned about the plans, and we think we just need to take a pause, because if the vast majority of residents in Edinburgh don't know what's being planned, and I've had conversations on the doorstep about that, how then can we as a committee go forward with them? We as a council, as my fellow councillor Joe Mowat said earlier, we need to get the basics right for residents, and that's fixing the roads and it's fixing the pavements for all users. And the amount of money required to implement these proposals that are in front of us is billions. And I think residents would maybe prefer that money elsewhere, because here's exactly what they're going to get. Closures of the Cowgate, part of the Canongate, Carlton Road at its junction with Lee Street, along with the proposal to cut the number of buses travelling along Princess Street. Cars and commercial vehicles preventing from driving down the north and south of the bridge and over the Mount. Traffic moved to boundary roads, including Queen Street, Lothian Road, Lauriston Place, The Pleasance. Businesses, you'll have time delivery windows. And in the summer, potentially closing the Cowgate on an experimental basis. And if it works, it will never open again to traffic. A timetable that includes the possibility of introducing all the new regulations over a single weekend next year. And let's not forget, 2 billion tramlines southwards to the Royal Infirmary, of which we don't even have the money in place at the moment. Not to mention what we've discussed earlier about the Roseburn cycle path and also the potential closure of Holyrood Park. We need to give residents a clearer choice of what's happening. We need to inform them better. Edinburgh, as I said earlier, will lose millions due to a lack of parking. We have to find that money elsewhere, and we've spoken about how that could be possible. So therefore, I, along with my Edinburgh Conservative colleagues, have grave concerns surrounding these proposals. And as head of the team, Daisy, and you and your team have done a lot of work. I really appreciate it. But we think we just need to take a breath, because we know when we go on the doorsteps, we will be facing the barrage of questions. And that is why I'm putting this motion forward today. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The City Mobility Plan has a focus on health and well-being, climate change, and inclusion and sustainability. These are all honourable ambitions. However, they don't reflect the issues that most residents expect the Transport Department of their local council to focus on. I think we as a committee have lost our way on the journey to manage and improve the city. We're focusing on soft, idealistic issues with a complicated, integrated approach, when the problem the city and residents face are hard and pragmatic, that need a simpler approach towards the provision of public services. I've raised at several committee meetings my concern that the CMP set out here is an over-engineered intellectual paper, a little light on real practicalities. How do we provide the public services that we need, such as repairing potholes, providing public transport, improving pavements, and keeping people safe? And how do we pay for it? Let's keep it simple and solve the problems in front of our faces, rather than risk further deterioration by trying to be too clever. The KPIs in this report tell a story. The laser-sharp focus on reducing car kilometres has ended up with slower buses and fewer cyclists. The one good objective we've achieved is improved air pollution, already discussed at the last committee, and I am delighted that officers included a section on how we move to revoke the air quality management areas, despite the overwhelming rejection of my request at last committee. We can achieve goals and get a better city if we focus our attention in the right way. And with that, I second our amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Cowdy. Do we have any contributions to this debate? Councillor Dublin.
Thank you, Convener. I wasn't going to take up any more time, but I do take issue with the suggestion that all of this work is to support idealistic issues. I think climate change is real. Air pollution is a real problem. And I think it's admirable that we've got a plan to get to a place, or get close to a place by 2030, where we've got much improved air quality and a much improved lifestyle available to our residents. I don't think it's idealistic at all. I think it's something that's essential, and that applies to everything about climate change. If 50, 60 years ago we'd taken idealistic issues such as climate change seriously, we would not be enjoying the type of weather patterns that we're facing today. And on the doorsteps that I knock, residents are very concerned for their children's well-being for the future, because of the impact of climate change. Okay.
Do we have any other contributions? Okay, I think I'm not sure who can still speak. Just to okay. So let's go to summing up. If there's no other contributions, so. So this stuff isn't easy, and I think the Conservatives are right to ask, some questions about deliverability, etc. And it'd be foolish to say that, all of us haven't thought about this and implications of it. But in terms of 7.1, I think some of the contributions in proposing there went slightly beyond 7.1. But I think in terms of 7.1, we're heading in the right direction. What I thought was remarkable is we had quite an array of deputations this morning. But there was none really from people saying, this is the wrong thing, we shouldn't be doing this. So, and that does reassure me. And whilst there's been, a bit of debate on social media, and all of us had a few emails about Roseburn, I've had very little about what's in the Settlement Mobility Plan. And Councillor Munro, I don't think that's because residents don't understand the plans. You can argue that perhaps Council's not been clear enough, or we've not been clear enough, but I wouldn't say it was because residents don't understand the plans. So with that, I'm happy to move the report. I won't accept the Lib Dem amendment. I think you knew that anyway. I'll accept the Green one, and I think we've already agreed as a committee that we should trial this on the 70, but I think it's just officer workload that's really prevented that from any update on that coming to committee. And I'm afraid I'll be declining the Conservative amendment as well. So basically accepting the Green only. So we're all agreed on that? Sorry.
Nice try.
Councillor Dykes-O'Downey.
We'd still like to press our own amendment if it's okay, but we would accept the Green addendum in our amendment. Thank you.
And we'll press ahead with ours, but we're not accepting anybody's.
Thank you. And can I just check, Green Group, are you happy with yours being accepted and you won't be pressing yours separately? No. Thank you. So the motion is the report plus the Green Group addendum. That's moved by Councillor Arthur and seconded by Councillor Ficenda. Amendment 1 is the Liberal Democrat Group amendment by Councillor Dykes-O'Downey, seconded by Councillor Osler, also accepting the Green Group addendum. And Amendment 2 is the Conservative amendment by Councillor Munro, seconded by Councillor Cowdy. Could I please have votes for the motion first, please? 7, thank you. For Amendment 1, it's the Liberal Democrat plus Green. 2. And for Amendment 2, the Conservative amendment, please. 2. Thank you. So that's 7 for the motion, 2 for Amendment 1, 2 for Amendment 2, so the motion's carried.
I've not got a microphone up. Right, okay, you're right, we're on the 2 hours actually, we should, thank you. So, can we come back at 20 to 4? Because I'm mindful I want to spend a decent amount of time on the tram report, at the very least. Okay? So as I said, it'd be good, obviously it's really important stuff, but it'd be good, so is the tram reports, it'd be good if we could find space for that. So really welcome the work on the circulation plan. I think it's going to help us in the coming years without a doubt, but no doubt there'll still be some difficult decisions ahead. I think, as Daisy said earlier, the city centre element, of course, is of particular interest. And as Daisy said earlier, this was a 10-year plan, but I think what the consultation showed last year is that people want us to be bolder and think bigger and act faster. And I think that was one of the themes that came through in the questions earlier. But I do sense nervousness around this in terms of the pace, and I think people are right to ask questions about that. And I think that the modelling shows that there could be significant delays to public transport if we don't get this right. And that's why it's really important that we do get this right, absolutely. And, you know, so none of us want to see delays to public transport. So I think that's why it's right that we approve this way as a way forward, but we ask Daisy and our team to do all we can to reduce those delays and make sure city centre residents and businesses are supported through this. So as I've been saying over the last few days, it's not going to be a 10-year plan anymore. It might be a few days if we manage to do what Ghent did, but it's more likely to be weeks or months, but certainly not years, I hope, before we see the implementation of this. And I think, going back to the target point made earlier, hitting the 30% reduction target is going to be really difficult. But I don't really think that means we should do nothing just because it's a difficult target. We have to do what we can to reach that target, and let's hope we do reach it. And this is absolutely a key part of it. But we've got a lot of work to do to make sure it does work. So with that, really happy to thank Daisy and her team for this work and also propose this report. Councillor Facenda.
Formally.
Councillor Aston.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. So I'm really impressed by how bold this plan is. Street allocation framework looks really positive, and it should be the basis for improvement, not just with the pretty radical proposals we've got in front of us for the city centre, but for the whole city, and especially the key travel corridors. Just want to say a word, obviously, for Leslie McInnes in the previous administration, because for both this report and the previous one, we've considered the work done then is what we're building upon now. And we feel that even this enhanced version of improvements to the city centre can go further and faster, and actually need to go further and faster if we've got any chance of meeting that 30% target by 2030 that the convener was just mentioning there. In the Cowgate during the Fringe, when I was seeing shows, it was actually absolutely terrifying seeing folk, on the tiny narrow pavements there and traffic continuing to go past, and even out with August, it's pretty harum-scarum on Friday and Saturday nights. So sadly, it was no surprise that there was that horrible incident in November. But as I mentioned earlier, I feel like the same safety considerations that you see in the Cowgate apply on the bridges and on Nicholson Street as well, if not more so. Bus stop queues spilling out into the road, into oncoming traffic. And obviously, I appreciate there are greater challenges there. There are more connections into that corridor, and it's busier. But it also brings a potential advantage of relieving Leith Street and the Piccadilly Place gyratory, which of course you highlighted the issues with recently, Convener. So I think that merits consideration for faster action, as well as of course the lawn market, which I mentioned at last month's committee. As we've already discussed, the changes to Holyrood Park, those are his decision. They'll be informed by the consultation. But we just want to make sure and be explicit that nothing we do through our future streets slows or blocks whatever it is that Hez decides to do in relation to Holyrood Park. So, so obviously Ghent implemented their circulation plan, over a very, very limited period of time, and experienced a 37% reduction in car use, which I think would delight most of us around this table. But we have to give consideration to areas on the edge of the proposed PPZ, especially Tollcross and around Lothian Road, but also Dummy Dykes and Holyrood Road to the east as well. And of course, Powder Hall, the Powder Hall line is something I'm going to keep pursuing. I'm keen to see what comes back in terms of that, and I'm happy for that to be folded into the report that our amendments addendum is generating, I should say. So just to wrap up, as I say, this is very bold, and its boldness and ambition is welcome. But the devil is in the implementation as well as the detail, and we will have a further big decision when we come to consider the implementation programme and the operation plan. But that's for another day, and so I move the SNP addendum.
So just quickly to second, I think we've identified another potential area that could be expedited in the lawn market's already going to be closed for a significant period of time, and I think we can take advantage of that without having much knock-on effect anywhere else. I think just some of the commentary earlier on about residents not knowing which way is up or down in the old town, I think that is the case in some parts, and actually we have an opportunity there to improve that. The streets change in the summer through the winter, through the autumn. If we can have a standardised approach, it will relieve officer resource time, because we'll just have one option that works year round, and I think we can get that for those areas. As my colleague Danny said, I do have concerns for communities in Dummy-Dykes, West End, Tollcross on the outside of that ring, but the proof is in the pudding, and at the operational plan, how we can prioritise residents. Hopefully it can be a positive change for the residents within and outside of that too. So happy to second.
Councillor Dexter-Downey.
Thank you, Convener, and we also welcome this plan and recognise the huge amount of work that has gone into bringing this to committee, and I'm glad to see that most of the parties here are not that far apart actually in how we view the proposals. We know from consultations on the City Mobility Plan that improving conditions for pedestrians is important and welcomed widely across the city, and we too are especially keen on proposed improvements to residential communities, local town centres, and we think the corridor approach is a really sensible way to go about it. We also recognise that in the city centre some trial closures through traffic on certain streets could really improve conditions for walking, wheeling and cycling, and so we're very much open to those trials, although it'd be really useful if those trials can then be scrutinised by this committee, mindful also of Councillor Mowatt's comments about accessibility. We do also, and we really do understand the need to make improvements to the bridges corridor and the pedestrian experience there. We do have concerns that by closing the bridges through traffic, in addition to the closure of the mount that was already agreed several years ago, as things stand, we are putting an unacceptable strain on the only other major north-south route, Lothian Road. And our fear is that by closing the North Bridge, we create the city's largest car park from Queen Street to Tollcross. This plan says that longer travel times by private car are part of what will encourage people to switch to other modes. And we get that. But there's a difference between longer journeys and a daily gridlock. And this could be exacerbated if vehicle access through Holyrood Park is further restricted, as well as might. And we have to be mindful that this is a decision that's ultimately not in the Council's gift. And it also doesn't help if the modelling tells us now that the length of bus journeys from the Leith area to Tollcross can be double or more. So we're really keen to see what mitigations are going to be proposed to help with that. So we welcome much of option C, and we look forward to seeing how this will all work in the operational plan. We recognise that securing funding for some of the proposed improvements will be a challenge, and that further prioritisation will likely need to take place. The quality of implementation will also be key to success. However, just the one point, given the limitations of the modelling, as we've discussed, given the potentially very significant impact, especially on bus travel times along Lothian Road, given the potential knock-on effects of restrictions on the Mount Corridor, other proposed trial closures, and given the uncertainty around the future of traffic in Holyrood Park, we believe that right now we simply cannot make the decision on the North Bridge corridor until we can do so in a properly informed way. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one quick thing. I was comforted to hear that obviously lessons have been learnt obviously from Piccadilly Place, and there's a thought process of the overall of everything that we're doing. But as my colleague has just said, we do have concerns because it's all good saying that we've learnt, but part of the learning process is to understand too much. If too much is done, you don't know what is successful or not. So that's why we are just proposing some small adjustments, because within the entirety of what's being proposed, these are quite small things. So we want to make sure that this is a success. We take our residents with us. People have an understanding of where we're going. And we're not spending our time retrofitting, going backwards, because we're having to sort of re-look at other aspects. So with that, I second our amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Osler. Councillor Bandel.
Thank you very much. Literally all of my speeches will start off this way today, but this is so exciting. This report proposed the big transformational changes that we need to meet our car kilometre reduction targets, and just in general make the heart of the city a more pleasant place to walk, wheel and cycle, and use public transport as well. And I think the whole committee actually got a really nice email from a resident whose 5-year-old is really looking forward to being able to safely get around the city centre on their bike. And I'm looking forward to that too. I think it's always nice to get these emails from people who might not always, respond to consultations and stuff like that. Of course, there's always bits here and there that can be improved, and that is what we are trying to do with this admittedly quite wordy addendum. Bring long reports, get long addendums. First of all, experiences from places like Ghent show that stuff like this leads to considerable reduction in motor traffic, but the remaining traffic will move differently through the city, which will likely affect some of the projects that are already in the pipeline. We are keen to ensure that people using Lothian Road and other roads that will be affected will still be pleasant and, more importantly, will still be safe places to get around. And we are interested in how the Major Junctions Review, which we held off on at the last meeting, and the Lothian Boulevard project can help with that potentially. On Holyrood Park, similar to our SNP colleagues, we wanted to stress that we are still supportive of removal of as much traffic from the park as possible, and I will be happy to make a verbal amendment to change 1.1.9 to agree to work with HES on any efforts they make to reduce through traffic in Holyrood Park, just to recognise that that's their thing. On Northbridge, we were thinking that for a lot of cyclists coming from the north and the east of the city, it will actually remain the most direct link to the city centre, and if you are a more confident cyclist, you might still take that route instead of the recommended alternative via Waverley Bridge and then up the hill, which is also quite steep. And especially if there are tram tracks on Northbridge, as I hope there will be, there's a real need to ensure that that route remains safe for cyclists. So we would like to explore if we can fit in some segregated cycling lane just for that bridge, even if it's just, for the uphill stretch. I think that could be really helpful and make it more safe. Lastly, 2 points related to relocations of a primary cycling network. Firstly, some of the routes that have been proposed as alternatives are on off-road paths, and we have some concerns regarding women's safety and their perceptions of safety in those cases. We want to make sure that off-road paths are only used as a last resort, and if they are used, we are working in collaboration with our colleagues who are working on making Edinburgh a feminist city, which I think that's part of the project in general. Secondly, I know there was some disappointment that a few cycling routes are now planned to be delivered via quiet side streets rather than on-road segregated cycle lanes. I think there's some benefits to using side streets, which can be delivered possibly faster and more cheaply, but we need to make sure that those areas are then traffic calmed, so it's actually safe for kids and more vulnerable road users to move through them. And in the case of Morningside, obviously, the Greenbank to Meadows Quiet route is already underway. And we are asking that the next report on that, which I believe is coming this spring, will reflect that this route is now the recommended cycling route for Morningside and will be made, we need to make that safe. Thank you. That's all.
Formally second, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have, Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Convener. The Conservative group are obviously opposing the City Mobility Plan. We think issues have not been addressed, namely, we think inadequate consultation. We believe, obviously, there is a lack of research on the implications of the post-pandemic changes, certainly to work patterns and travel patterns, and we can see that if we look down at Waverley Court with how many council officers are actually working there from working at home. We have grave concerns about transport going through Craigmillar and Queen Street, east-west journeys between Lothian Road and London Road. And we're also concerned about Our Future Streets report, because it's the first opportunity, I've said before, for members of the public to view a transport layout for the city based on the principles that have been outlined. We're also a little bit disappointed that the multitude of temporary measures such as spaces for people, that were put in under COVID restrictions are still having a negative impact on travel in the city. And, you know, we would like a pause on all further work on these plans in order so we can undertake a comprehensive yes-no consultation on proposals, highlighting the overall effect that's outlined in the maps within our futures streets. I think that would be beneficial to residents. In the meantime, work should concentrate on using available resources to make pedestrian improvements by tackling the most called for actions in current consultations. That is repairing the footways, more drop curves, improved bus shelters. And this needs to be achieved while also basically directing any freed up officer time and financial resource into repairing our current crumbling transport infrastructure and making it easier for people to walk, wheel and cycle around our road by better public roads and public footpaths. I have grave concerns about various things that have come up, especially the Greenbank to Meadows quiet route as well. But I am hopeful that when we have consultations, that the consultation will come back and give a very clear opinion of what residents want. And that is what we base any decision on. And that's why we think residents in Edinburgh need to be given a very clear yes-no consultation on what's going to be happening in their city. And move my name. Thank you.
Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much, Convener. So, Transport Committee in October 22 was my first introduction to the circulation plan. I read the committee papers over and over again, and I had my head in my hands. Trying to get my head around what I was looking at had to do with the circulation for a Transport Committee of the Council. I sat with our group leader, Ian White, repeating, what am I missing? I just don't get it. And I'm afraid not much has changed since then. Everyone will, I'm sure, see the similarity between our amendment for this item and the previous CMP. I recognise the integrated nature of the approach we're being asked to follow and the convener's decision to take these two items together. As such, we composed a single amendment to cover both. Similarly, much of what I said seconding the last item relates to this one, so I aim not to repeat. I have voiced concerns in the past that the integrated approach to transport planning we're being asked to follow has a significant flaw in either it all works together or it doesn't work at all. And bearing in mind the tight financial constraints the Council regularly faces, it is inconceivable that the networks proposed in these papers will be achievable, and I cannot then envisage what our transport network will look like in 2030 or 2040 or beyond. The street allocation framework is too restrictive. The city centre transformation plans look like they will just further increase congestion, and they've not yet been run past residents. And the place-based approach can only lead us to a position where we have very limited good quality areas while the rest of the city deteriorates. And for that reason, I cannot support the proposal and second our amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Cowdy. Do we have any further contributions? Councillor Dobbin, you're the only person who can still speak. No pressure. No, don't feel obliged to. Thank you, thank you. So, thank you for all those comments, and it's really good actually to see, you know, walking and public transport focusing in so much of them, and just reflecting what the Conservatives say. I think you're right to say there still is a lot of uncertainty about how traffic, how transportation generally and the economy is responding to the COVID aftermath. That things are settling down, but I'm not sure we could keep on waiting and waiting to see if they change further. So looking at the amendments, right? So just going through the amendments and addendums very quickly. So the SNP are happy to agree that, but for at 1.1.2, include public transport providers as stakeholders, and also the final sentence, this process should detail any impacts on public transport. Now, this is specific to Northbridge. Now, I get that people are concerned about Northbridge either as part of what the SNP are talking about or even within the enhanced city centre transformation proposals. So hopefully that report coming back looking at Northbridge, and hopefully we'll have some modelling in that which will look at the impacts. Hopefully that will help reassure the Lib Dems on the points that they made. On SNP 1.1.8, we'll, as is already said, we'll include a report on that on the 1.1.2 action, and it'll also include any update on the South Sub. So on the Lib Dems, I'm happy to accept 1.1.3 and 4 as an addendum, but I'll reject 1.1.5. I think it's covered, as I said, the Northbridge analysis will be covered by the SNP addendum. On the Greens, happy to accept, but add to 1.1.6, add and minimise delays to the public transport, and accepting the verbal amendment that the Greens made to the comment about HES. And when it comes to the Tory amendment, I'm going to decline that. So I've went through that quite quickly, but I think people have a text of what I'm proposing, so it should be clearer than it might sound on the webcast. And Rebecca, sorry, Rachel has that as well. So, are we agreed? Councillor Munro, do you want to go first, or was it Councillor Dexter-Downey? Or Councillor Cowdy, sorry. Councillor Cowdy's doing the talking. Sorry, Councillor Dexter-Downey.
Sorry, no, we'll just press our amendment, but I would say that we have sympathy with a lot of the context from the SNP and also some of the Green amendments, but just for the interest of time, we'll not incorporate any of it in our amendment.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. And are the Conservatives voting alone or with the... Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. Can I just check if the SNP and Green groups are happy with theirs being incorporated into the other positions? Don't want to press them separately. Thank you. Okay, so the motion is moved by Councillor Arthur, seconded by Councillor Facenda, which is now the report plus the SNP group addendum as verbally adjusted, and the Green Group addendum also as adjusted, and points 1.1.3 and 1.1.4 of the Liberal Democrat Group amendment. Amendment 1 is the Liberal Democrat Group amendment by Councillor Dixter-Downey, seconded by Councillor Osler, and Amendment 2 is the Conservative amendment moved by Councillor Munro and seconded by Councillor Cowdy. Could I have votes for the motion first, please? 7, thank you. For Amendment 1, please. 2, and for Amendment 2, please. 2, thank you. Motion's carried.
Okay, I want to go on to 7.3 now, and it's 4:10. So I think I feel really bad that we've given ourselves so little time to talk about the tram report. We've only got ourselves to blame. Please don't blame the convener. So what I hope to do is get through it by 4:45. And that will give us 15 minutes to talk through WETIP, which is huge in its own right, and also the motion which we'll have at the end of the agenda. So it's been a really good discussion, but perhaps we should have managed it a little bit differently. So am I handing over to Daisy for this now? So Daisy, one of the things I think it's worth